All right. We're ready. Yes. My gavel. All right, I will call this meeting to order. And let's see, for the guests in the room, please make sure to sign in if you'd like to make public comment during our public comment section. And public comment is limited to 2 minutes per speaker, and I'll turn it over to you, Alexis.
Okay. Shall we start with roll call?
Yes.
Okay.
My agenda.
Bill Groff,
Here.
Jim Knight,
Here.
Sarah Lucas, present. Thank you. Steve Nagy,
Present.
Brian Frey,
Present.
Jeff Pritchard,
Present.
and Catherine Stevens.
Present.
Okay, and that concludes roll call. For public comment?
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to start us off with, I'd like to acknowledge that we have received written public comment from Benny Benson with Sisters Eagle Airport regarding the COAR grant approval, and public comment from David Mock from Charbonneau Country Club. These comments were forwarded to the State Aviation Board. We'll kick us off with in-person public sign-up. So we have 3 people. So for each speaker, please state your name, city of residence, and affiliation for the record. And then when you do come up to make your public comment, if you could please stand right here next to Alex so that the speaker picks you up. Shall we start with David Mock?
And myself, so I don't get caught. Thank you all for listening to me this morning and for accepting the public comment I made online. I'm David Mock. I'm on the board of Charbonneau Country Club and the chair of our Civic Affairs Committee. And as you know, Charbonneau's had a stake in the game at Aurora Airport in the master plan for the last 15 years. We like the Aurora Airport. I want to be clear about that. We like that there are a lot of jobs at Aurora Airport. We like that it's a good general aviation airport. We respect the history as an airstrip that was started in the 40s and that has been used for flight training since that time. What we not very happy with is the infrastructure as it exists now regarding its sewage, its water, and its ability to handle people in a public disaster. We don't like the fact that they're trying to expand the airport to accept larger planes because of the extra runway spare, the runway length. It was said at one of the PAC meetings that I've attended, as well as I believe a quote from a previous ODAB board meeting, that a longer airport will result in bigger planes. The airport right where your offices are is 11 minutes by air from Aurora Airport. And you know this quality of the 751 acres, your asphalt runways, the services, the fire prevention, none of which are available at Aurora. We're afraid of land creep. And who wouldn't be in our situation with what's going on in other rural areas? The Amazon warehouse is 6 miles from that exit. That's too close for a vertical aircraft taking off and being used at Aurora Airport. We're right between the big market for those possible package deliveries and where that possible airport would be. And I'm over 2 minutes. Thank you for listening to me. I think I've stated everything I plan to state. And we appreciate it. I hope you'll do more due diligence on moving big aircraft to this airport down the street. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next person signed up for public comment is Charlie Landis. Thank you.
Yes, good morning. I'll be brief.
Come on over, Charlie. Yeah, just so I can pick you up.
Oh, okay. No, I just would encourage whatever had happened for our pappies at Independence Airport. Be a big advantage. There's lots of airplanes represented. And anyway, that's all I've got to say. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
And then our last in-person sign up is Lad, and that's at Henderson.
Yes,
Correct. Okay, from Pacific City.
can't read my writing either. So. My name is Ladd Henderson. I reside at 33020 Terrace View Drive in Pacific City. I've been before this board on 2 other occasions. The last one you threw me out, but I apparently at the October meeting, you requested the department to come up with an appraisal of my property located at the end of the Pacific City Airport. And I just received that yesterday, and I was amazed that an actual certified appraiser would even consider signing his name to such a document. But anyway, I thought that probably the board would not see copies of that appraisal, made copies of it, and copies also of my comments to Mr. Close. Never seen an appraisal, and I took appraisal classes at Chemeketa, where you actually take a difference in the comparable property and deduct it, even though it should be a plus to my particular property. He deducted the value of the sewer and water connections, which he gave a value of 30,000. But there's many other errors in there. But anyway, that's my 2 minutes, and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and that looks like that is everybody for in person. So we'll go ahead and move on to those that are online. So if you could just bear with me while I grab everybody's things here. So it looks like Jared Hullock is the first one. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Jared. Give me just one quick moment. Okay. Jared, do you have access?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Jared. Please state your name and affiliation for us.
Hi, thanks. I'm Jared Hillock. I live in Enterprise, Oregon. I own Enterprise Electric. I'm an airplane owner and pilot in Wallowa County. The reason for my statement today is to express the need for additional hangar space in Wallowa County. Both Enterprise Municipal and Joseph State Airport are out of hangar space. I have a list of 4 people, including myself, that need hangars, one of which is an A&P that wants to live in Wallowa County. He's working on getting his IA, and he wants to live and work in Wallowa County. And so we find it, hard to find mechanics, and have somebody that wants to move here in need of a hangar is pretty important. I've been in contact with Mr. Beach and Mr. Olson about a through the fence program access, but since that was a pilot program, I understand it's been closed. The Joseph Master Plan has more space in the master plan, but with state funding, I'm just assuming that that's not high on the list of priorities to get developed. So I have 10 acres adjacent to the east side of the airport that could easily be developed for hangar space without the state needing to develop any additional land if we could put together a through the fence access. So my statement today is just to urge the board to develop a through the fence program, or to look at Joseph State Airport on a case-by-case basis for that through the fence access, as the need is there for additional hangar space. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. Our next speaker will be, it looks like it's Betsy Johnson. You should now have access to your mic, Betsy. Please state your name and affiliation for the record.
I would respectfully like to withhold my public comment until after the Century West presentation on the update for the Aurora Master Plan.
You need to take public comment in the public comment.
Yeah,
section.
yeah.
Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what you said.
We're talking about this. So as chair, you do control the meeting and the schedule. Yeah. And so you can choose to do it how you think is appropriate. Okay. With respect, Ms. Johnson, I would ask that you provide your public comment now.
Okay. It would certainly be better to be able to react to what the presentation is, but I will go ahead and give my public comment. My name is Betsy Johnson. I was a senator from District 16 in the Oregon legislature for 2 decades. I actually, through legislation, helped found the department, and I ran the department for 5 years. And I think I have a kind of unique status in this conversation. I handled one of the master plans for Aurora previously. I want to thank the board for giving some movement on some of the more controversial aspects of the master plan. I will keep my comments short today. I'm perplexed as to why there has been no desire to want to explore anything that would preserve those drain fields. Apparently, an aeronautical engineer and a master planner for airports has come up with a proposed alternative that has been summarily rejected by the board or by the staff to even hear about a possibility. And so I will limit my comments at this juncture to saying I wish that the board and the staff would be sufficiently open-minded to try to problem solve instead of just saying our way or no way. And so I'll conclude there. Again, no, I won't. I'm going to say thank you again for listening to the possibility that others brought salient information to your deliberations and that you've moved on that. I still find it perplexing, and that's why I wanted to comment after the Century West presentation, why it is that the agency is planning a $185 million project that can't be built. You're going to throw the cloud of condemnation over those houses and businesses along the road that you want to move a de minimis amount. ODOT is not going to pay to move the road. And even if the feds, and I think it's a long shot, particularly given the changes at the federal level, that you're going to get that kind of money to move a road when there are so many pressing needs. And I know that there are different pots of money, but I still think you're going to have to build a pretty tough case to get any federal support to move that road. And you'll have to come up with a match. And right now, to the best of my knowledge, when I left the legislature and knew the Department of Aviation's budget, you don't have any money to match. So I remain perplexed as to why you're pushing ahead with a master plan that has scant chance of implementation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and then it looks like the last person that has their hand raised is Benny Benson. Benny, you should now have access to your mic. Please state your name and affiliation for the record. Benny, are you able to unmute yourself?
I am, and that was perfect because my first comment was just to confirm that you can hear me. So can you hear me on this? Okay.
Yes, of
So
course.
I confirm that.
Yes. No, we may have lost you again there, Benny. Okay, Benny, we're unable to hear you.
Hear him temporarily.
We heard you for a moment. I see that you've unmuted. Are you able to speak at all? Yeah, I see that he's unmuted, but it looks like maybe unable to speak.
And Mike. Looks like he's muted.
He's unmuting and unmuting, trying to see.
Oh, you show him as muted.
I see that he has unmuted his mic.
Shows the ability to. You can show up in there.
Mr. Stevens, is it okay if he calls one of us or we call him and put him on speaker?
Yep, that'd be fine.
Yeah.
Just a second. A minute here, please.
Benny, you might be getting a phone call, and then we can get your speech over. Yes. He'll call in.
He says that. He posted this
go speaker to speaker, but I guess. Can you mute your, can you mute your audio, please? Okay. We're gonna put you on speaker next to our microphone. I don't know how well this will work, so
Oh, have you mute the meeting?
mute the meeting audio.
Yeah, the meeting, this will work out on the phone. I appreciate it. Yeah, effort there. I contemplated heartily to be speaking in person, but with the weather, this made sense. So thank you for that consideration, and I'll try and be fast based on chewing up my early time. I did send in so Benny Benson, Sisters Eagle Airport, I did send in a letter so that you have that. So I won't hit the points directly, but I do want to kind of reiterate them. Follow the process of I guess through the last ARC review. What was clear and what my two requests are: one is based on the rules as presented on the aviation website and as shown for applicable eligibility. I'm asking the board to consider the maximum grant of $150,000 per application. It is unclear how at least 13 grants got more in that process after going through the electronic exercise and the inability to put more than 150,000 in. But I understand there was an asterisk and you could actually apply for that. I find a little bit insincere that it's on the rules, it's presented, it's on the website, and even the Oregon Department of Aviation asked for more than 150,000. This is impactful. I've recognized for the smaller airports. I go back to the time, and it was good to hear Betsy Johnson's voice when Betsy and Mary Rosenblum were sort of bantering about the COAR program and the ability to support smaller general aviation airports, specifically ones that are non-NIPIUS, and this is essentially their only source of infrastructure grant funding. In that process, as I watched the ARC review and respectfully was muted and both video and call, and I understand why, but I also found it somewhat insincere that a number of those were priority one of the ARC priority one projects. The ARC members that were doing the review that were allowed to speak towards those, even though there was no obvious conflict of interest, clearly were endorsing the higher request and basically the benefit of the projects. Also found it interesting the commentary that a number of the AIP related projects that likely, or as my understanding, already have match funds approved, we're asking for the excess of 150,000, which, as was stated clearly stated while they were talking, we are able then to release other funds, which to use for other projects in some ways floats into a general fund that doesn't fall into projects that have been vetted through this process. So somewhat of a concern. It can't be ignored, or it's hard to ignore that our chair is also the sponsor for the airport that's going to receive the most grants in the current approval. I understand and I know why that is, but I do know there was a historical process, whether it was COAR or Connect, where there was a limiting or a sharing. Everybody gets one, everybody gets two, everybody gets three, in order to spread the wealth. It's a non-issue when there's plenty of money to go around, but that is not the case here, and so that sharing would be useful. In sort of quick math, just the simple limiting of the 150,000 would open up almost 25% more Category 3 airports that would be very reliant on this infrastructure funding. So hopefully you hear me there, and I appreciate the startup there, and thank you for the time. I'm very appreciative of both the COAR, the PMP, and everything everybody does. So thank you for the consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Other public comments? Nope, that would conclude our public comment section.
Okay, great. Thank you for all who participated in public comment today. We do appreciate all of your input. So we will move to the next item on the agenda, and I think we'll have a bit of a more robust discussion than just the action items ahead of us. I've asked Andrea to give us a memo kind of outlining the COAR grant funding for this year, and I've asked her to walk us through that memo, and then we'll have a discussion from there for taking action.
All right, thank you so much, Chair Stevens and Aviation Board. So I'll start with reading the memo as Chair Stevens requested, and then I have a short slideshow. I'll introduce Shelley Humble, our ARC chair, so she can just talk a little bit about the ARC process and how they recommended the applications for approval to the board. And then, of course, we'll head up to the board.
No, she should be muted. Her computer should remain muted. Maybe he's having a hard time hearing.
That's great.
Yeah, Andrea, would you mind coming a little closer to the mic?
I can hear Andrea quite well, so I don't know about others online.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate that.
And I'll stay right here for a moment, but yes, please let me know if there is any trouble hearing me, because I do tend to be a little bit more quiet. So I'll go ahead and start with the memo. So this is regarding our 2024-25 COAR grant projects and funding authorization recommendation. The 2024-25 COAR grant cycle is the 9th cycle since the inception of the Aviation System Action Program, or ASAP. Funding for this cycle is $4 million, and the application period ran from October 7th to the 25th, 2024. 57 applications were submitted with a total funding request of approximately $6.2 million, against $71 million in total project costs. In cycles 7 and 8, so the 2 previous cycles before this one, the State Aviation Board increased the maximum grant request to $250,000 per grant request. These requests were approved based on additional revenue available in the COAR program due to closure of previous Aurora grant program and the transfer of that revenue to COAR. For this cycle, the maximum grant amount is $150,000, but Oregon Administrative Rule 738-124-040 does allow for funding requests above $150,000. So just to refer to what that rule says, the aggregate maximum grant award that a recipient may receive under the COAR program is $150,000 per project. But notwithstanding this, the board may award a larger grant if it finds that a larger award for a particular project would serve the purposes of the program. Additionally, the rule asks that if an applicant applies for a grant amount exceeding that $150,000, the department may request additional documentation detailing how this grant amount would serve one or more of the program purposes. And as part of the application process, we did ask applicants who requested more than $150,000 to include extra information in their application about why they were requesting that. So 13 applicants requested a grant amount in excess of $150,000. 7 of those requests fell under Priority 1 applications, and 6 of the requests were under the Priority 3 applications. The Aviation Review Committee met virtually in cohorts, which is a pair of reviewers with, they had approximately 12 applications to score this cycle. And then that was followed by a meeting of all the ARC members for discussion and ranking of all the applications. A major focus of the discussion related to funding the requests submitted for more than $150,000. And the ARC voted to recommend awarding the requests as submitted, including those requests over $150,000. So again, the ARC recommendations were to award all applications in Priority 1, all applications in Priority 2, and then all applications in Priority 3 above the funding cut line, which was, I believe, 4 applications down on the list. And then, so then we have the simple motions for the board consideration on there as well. Were there any questions on that? All right. So we'll get into our slides here. Yes.
One question. Forgive me for not knowing. Is the category selected by the applicant or during the scoring process?
The priority or
not the priority, the category.
Category for
either 1, 2, or 3.
So those are during the application process. So that's the
self-identified by the applicant. Okay, thank you.
So just a little bit of overview of our COAR grant program. Of course, we started our application period this past October, did our internal reviews and ARC reviews and meetings between November and January. And then, of course, we're here today for our board approval. And then once we receive those approvals, we'll begin notifying the new grantees so we can start getting those new agreements executed. This cycle, again, we had 57 applications. Total project costs almost $71 million. Funding requests just a little under 6.2 million, with available funding of 4 million. And then I've just listed there what our previous cycle requests and awards were, and then also what our current open obligations are for the program. Here we just have a slide that splits up how the applications and dollars were by priority again. So of course, as usual, most were in the priority ones, just a couple in the priority 2 for resiliency requests. And then we had 19 in the priority 3 for economic benefit requests. Once again, just to go over here on the slide, the grant request in excess of $150,000. I've got the rule there again, just to reference OAR 738-124-0040. And then I just put a couple other considerations here that applicants are still required to meet their minimum match requirements per the OAR. So even if they are awarded a higher grant amount, they still need to meet their minimum match for the COAR program. And then 13 applicants requested this grant amount above $150,000, and the ARC voted to recommend awarding all those requests. I have one, it was kind of a last minute item that we put in here, and this is regarding Crater Lake Klamath Falls application. And it came up, Linda recognized that they are still in a category for minimum match percentage as a commercial service airport, but they are no longer commercial service. And the minimum match requirements are basically based on categories that are listed in the Oregon Aviation Plan. And for the Oregon Aviation Plan, an airport may request a change in their category to the board if they believe that they're no longer in that correct category. And so I just put up here showing that currently LMT would be required at 35% minimum match, but the category that they would be moved into would be a 25% minimum match. And the amount that we have in for approval for their application is at the 25% match. City of Klamath Falls has put together a request for the board to change their category, which will be sent over to the board today. And then we'll actually present it at the April board meeting for the board to vote on. Because it was kind of last minute, we weren't able to get it on the agenda for this meeting. So basically, the LMT's application is a priority 1. We would wait to execute it until the board made a decision on if their category would change. So we just wanted to let you guys know that. And Linda Tepper is on the meeting if there were any questions for her on.
Sure, understood. There's no request for deviation. This is just putting them into one category to the other category that best
Impacts
their
their
needs.
match, yes.
Right,
Yes.
but no ask for a deviation on anything. Right. So it's pretty straightforward. Right?
All right, so next I'll introduce our Aviation Review Committee Chair, Shelley Humble. Shelley, if you're able to unmute, go ahead.
Good morning, board, Aviation Board. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Perfect. I just would like to first give staff kudos. The way that they run the COAR program is fantastic. They are very cognizant of all of us who are either airport managers or part of the lane acts, or mine is lane act, the acts that take their time out to review all the grants that are presented and to look at staff's scoring as well as the blind scoring that the ARC committee does. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of applications that we read, and we do really look individually at all the grants, unbiased, look at the projects, look at the funding that's available. And I wish we could figure out a way to where we could fund all the grants, because all the grants are great projects, especially for little airports. I know it's really hard and it really frustrates me as an airport manager, and also as part of the ARC, that we can never seem to fund a lot of the priority 3 grants. I'm not sure that we have an answer on how to do that. But I do thank you for taking the time to let me speak regarding the COAR program for 2025. We had great projects. I don't think there were any projects that any of us thought were unworthy. We always look at priority 1 per statute, and they try and fund those. They are funded first. We did have a robust discussion regarding whether or not to award the higher amounts. And it was a decision by the whole ARC committee to award them as presented, as well as all the other in priority 3, although I don't believe much of those, if any, were funded. Again, I come before you to show you the slate of list for COAR 25 as recommended by the committee. And if you have any questions, I'd be willing to answer.
Shelley, I got a couple questions. Just want to make sure I understand how you guys went about the scoring. If I understood what you said correctly, you basically went priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. There was really no discussion on how to allot awards. It was just 1, 2, 3. Is that correct? Did I hear that right?
Per statutes, priority 1 is funded first. It doesn't mean that they're all funded. If there is a project that does not meet the qualifications, and or there is a reason to deny that application. So the scoring is done first by staff. Then it is broken into ARC committees. We do not rate our own grants, and it is a list of questions. And I believe, Andrea can correct me if I'm wrong, they are done through statute questions. And then we just answer them. There's usually 2 or 3 of us in a group that are looking at a handful. I think we had 6 this year that we reviewed. And then that scoring is automatically tabulated by the computer also. So when we come together as the committee, the whole ARC committee, we have a spreadsheet of how all the scoring came out. When we are in that group, we are really looking to see if there's any ties that need to be broken, if the funding doesn't go all the way down to the bottom, or if there are any projects that may need special consideration. We look at those, and we, as I said, we discussed at length the funding of the grants that requested more than $150,000. But as a group, all of the members, all of the committee, the ARC committee, felt that they didn't feel that appropriate to reduce the amount to 150 versus what they have asked for. So that's why we left the slate as presented.
No, I appreciate you explaining the process that you guys went through. That's very helpful for the conversation that we have as a.
Thank you, Shelley. Appreciate your input. Andrea, could you walk us through the priorities again for 133 and what those are?
So priority 1 are any applications that are related to an FAA project. So the airport has an FAA grant or will be getting one. And the priority 1 COAR grants help those sponsors pay their FAA match on those projects. Priority 2 are considered resiliency grants, and only airports that are listed as resiliency airports in the Oregon Aviation Plan can apply for that priority. And there's I keep forgetting to go back and count, but I want to say there's probably about 20 on that list. And then the priority 3 are for any non-FAA related projects, economic development, basically anything, our non-NIPIAS airports that are looking for help for funding would apply under that. So those are how the priorities work. And as Shelley mentioned, it is according to statute that the priority 1s are funded first, and then priority 2, and then priority 3. The ARC and the board do have the discretion, the ARC to recommend, for instance, if an applicant has multiple applications in there, the ARC could recommend only approve 1 or 2 of those as opposed to all of them, even if they all are in priority 1. So there is a little bit of latitude, and then the board can approve that way as well.
I could add to something else to consider for this cycle is FAA matches this go around, instead of being their standard 10%, are at 5%. So just something else to consider.
Thank you for that. So I think we'll start a board discussion here. So we'll probably put people in the queue to talk about these projects. And I don't know if anybody wants to kick it off, but I've got one question right out of the gate, which is, could you walk us through the priority 2 projects and tell us how do they adhere to the resiliency grant criteria?
I guess what I would say about that is there is not anything laid out in rule that specifically says what is considered a resiliency project. It more relates to what airports can apply under that priority. And so typically it's been, if it's not an FAA funded project and they are allowed to apply under priority 2, they look at the priority 2s because they're considered a resiliency airport, I guess.
There's the Oregon Resiliency Plan indicates 28 airports across the state that would fall within.
What did you say?
28.
28. Okay.
And it's from 2013, so probably due for an update, but that's the list that would include.
Chair, I was looking at that same thing too, and I was just trying to understand the criteria for applying. That's why I asked if the airport or if there's a criteria that you put them in, because I'm trying to reconcile what some of these group priority 2 resiliency grants are, and do they really improve the resiliency of an airport? From a purely, some of them sound like they do, and from the applications they did, of them sound more like economic benefit to me than resiliency. Yeah, so that was just my question as to if there was a greater criteria for whether or not they qualify to fit in. There's certainly, if they're a resiliency, if they're an airport, that's great and all that, but then does their grant fit into a resiliency component?
So this is probably for another entire big discussion, but as part of the last FAA reauthorization, resiliency has also been added now into AI. So it probably means we'll have to update our statute and our rule at some point when we figure out what that means. So but there's also the potential that some of the priority 1 FAA grants could be resiliency. So yeah, just something else to also consider.
Yeah, I think it would be great to have some criteria for the resiliency grants.
And it looks like Sarah has her hand.
Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, just to tag on to your questions, I was curious, what instructions did the ARC have in looking at those priority 2? Were they directed to look at whether or not they actually improved resiliency, or if it was more, if the project was, met just the criteria that staff scores on?
And again, it is just the criteria of they fall under the resiliency airports as defined in the COAR rule. So yeah, there isn't specifically anything regarding the projects.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, so if you are one of the 28 airports and you submit a priority 2 grant or a category 2 grant, it doesn't matter what that project is. It's just because you are one of the 20, so you can submit an application under category 2.
Fortunately, yes.
Well, to that, I would recommend that that be readdressed for future rounds of COAR, that's a discussion among staff for the board to look at, and if that's a rulemaking issue. But I think that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously about the new categorization at the FAA grants. So it does seem like there needs to be some realignment.
Comment. So I've got a couple questions and maybe a different perspective to share with the board. For the last couple of years, I've also been involved with the SPIRE grant process that is done by Oregon Department of Emergency Management. And we ran into the same challenge. You have priority 1, 2, and 3. And listening to some of the public comments earlier in the written comments regarding this process, it just sort of touched on where we were at with another state agency that was in a very similar situation. And I'm going to share what we did, but I have some questions going forth. Why is it that we're approving a project that gets a score in the category 1 of 184 when the next lowest score is far away from 184? You know, does it basically mean you can put in an application with no time? You just get your name on, no disrespect to, who is it? Jackson County, who got the low score. But in essence, it's, you get your application in there, you're going to get approved. And if that's the way the process is supposed to work, fair. With limited funds, how do we arrive at, well, we're going to give everybody that asks for more than 150 that extra funding? If we have 3 sets of priorities, wouldn't it make sense to fund everybody, assuming we have a set score? Like if we determine a score number and we say anything above like 169 is going to get funded. Anybody that doesn't score high enough, you know, let's say you call it below 70%, you don't get funded. And whatever funding is left over for the folks that ask for more money, they get the first priority of funding because they did better on their score. And that way, you know, we are keeping to our values. You know, there are several of us that are involved with the vision, the mission statement, and you know, helping focus where we are as an agency. Economic development is just as important as everything else. So if we're not going to fund, you know, a bunch of these priority 3 applications, are we not supporting economic development or sustainability of an airport? I'm kind of troubled by that, knowing that, you know, yes, we can give more money to some projects, but it just, the process seems slightly flawed. One of the hopes for the future, and if the board has the ability to make a recommendation today to maybe be a little bit more giving with some of these other projects, I think we should take that into consideration, because as somebody that writes grants, if I'm putting in for a priority 3 project and I'm scoring, you know, 230 or so points, and my score is equal to that of some of the ones that are getting funded in the priority 1, where's the incentive for me as an agency or an entity to even put in for a grant if it's not going to get any attention? So that's my feedback for our team.
My counter argument to that is not fully understanding the entire process, though, but if the score is designed as a rubric to be a contributing factor in making the decision, such as when I do college scholarship, your GPA is not the deciding factor. It's a factor of other things, including the essay and things. So if the rubric was designed to just be a factor, but not along with some other factors, then that argument doesn't hold. The way you described it, the rubric score is the only factor. And that's not the case here, I don't believe, the way I understood the process.
Yeah, no, I agree with where your example is coming from. I guess what I'm saying is, based on the money available, we could fund a majority of the priority 3 projects. We just won't be able to fully fund all of the projects that are asking for more than 150,000. And I, if we push back on the committee, the art committee, and say, okay, what's your cutoff score? So that not everybody in priority 3 is getting funded, but the ones that actually, the applications that actually meet the requirements of what the criteria are. Mr. Nagy was talking about, how do we know somebody falls into the criteria for priority 2? If we're sort of wavering in some of these areas, I think it's incumbent upon us to do the most for the people and the airports that are out there, as best we can. And while all of the projects that are probably requesting more than 150,000 are worthy of receiving that extra money, we can't do everything.
Understood. Just again, the flip side is that being a small city mayor for a long time, when we go for infrastructure grants, the mayor's writing the grant request because that's all we have. So the rubric is about how so you have all these professional people writing these grant requests. And I don't have a chance, right? Because I'm just the mayor doing this on the weekend. So yeah, I should do a good grant request as best I can, but there's other factors, right, above that I think need to be considered. And I'm not saying I don't agree with you, right? Like I could do my college scholarships to put a cutoff at 3.5. If you don't have a GPA of 3.5, I'm not even going to bother reading your essay. That's a rough one, right? Because what that does to me is, in my mind of equity, that cuts out kids who are homeless and things, or who are doing their best, right, with what they have. And I can see that in their essays. So I go both ways. I'm with you and I'm not with you in kind of a way, right? So, but that's kind of where it does, because I've done that. I wrote all the grants for my city and I've sucked at it, right? But they were valid needs, but I didn't get trained as a grant writer. So
go to Sarah now. She's got a comment.
Well, I agree with what Bill and Jeff are both saying. There's always two sides to every coin. Just want to remind, these aren't set up in categories. They are set up in priorities for a reason, based on the rulemaking that priority 1 is a higher priority for the state to fund, because it leverages the grant funds from FAA. So that can't be ignored. But I also want to, it hasn't been this common for so many multiple applications from one airport sponsor. It did seem like there was quite a few multiple applications for various projects. And what is the history of that and the precedents that this would make in doing actions for multiple projects for one sponsor?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Any other comments, Bill? I'm sorry, Jim.
Yeah, no problem. I would be very curious to see a spreadsheet that removed the additional amount of money that was over $150,000, and that money theoretically then could be used in the category 3 applications. So it does seem a little bit unfair, but part of the question is, if we don't provide funding over the $150,000, does that mean that those airports won't be able to complete their projects? Is that money? We don't have a way of looking to really see that this is critical that we have this money. If we don't, then we won't be able to do the project. On top of that, most of the applications that came to us, it was a minimum amount of contributions from the sponsors. It was whatever that minimum amount was. They didn't seem to, for the most part, go past that amount of money. It didn't find a way to do that. So this is quite a precedent that we really, I see that we're doing it right now, is trying to figure out what do we do about this? But I think it would be really helpful to see, because we have this choice today of whether or not to fund the extra amount of money for those applicants. If we say, no, I'm sorry, we can't, we would rather spread the money to all of the applications that could get the funding. What would that actually look like? How many of the priority 3 projects? Over the last years, I mean, since the ARC began, it was everything that we could do to see that we could find money to get into the category 3 projects, because, you know, as we're talking about, those are also important. I do strongly believe that category 1 projects should be funded. Priority 1 projects should be funded if we have the money, because of that return of the investment from the FAA. That's kind of, that's a no-brainer. It's these extras that, well, we don't know what would happen if we don't get that money to them, but they just, sorry, we can't do our project. Well, if that was the case, man, we would be funding a lot of priority 3 projects at that point. So I don't have an answer because I don't really have all the
Well, actually, we
information.
do have some answers, Jim, because I asked some of the same questions. And so I think Andrea has some answers for us around that, which is the one question is, if they don't get funded at the 250 level or whatever, if it's kicked back down to 150, are they still able to do their projects? And then what happens to the spreadsheet from there, and how many more projects could be funded?
Yeah. And so the question of whether the projects could go forward if they don't receive that extra funding came up during the ARC meeting. And basically what was determined is that with an approved FAA project, the airport has committed their match funds, and the COAR grant funds are not, they're not secure until these approvals have been done. So the airport should not be considering those funds as a part of the match until that's been approved. So the ARC didn't necessarily take that into consideration because it was more seen as it's the airport's responsibility to make sure they have the funding separate from COAR. And then it's great when you get the COAR funds and then can have kind of a little extra to your match there that way and not have to use the airport's own funds. And then regarding how the funding would fall, on that printout of the file there, the very last column shows grant amounts capped at $150,000. And so if you're looking at the priority 3s, which is just that last section there, the very first cut line shows that 4 priority 3 grants would be funded per the ARC's recommendation. If all of the applications were capped at 150,000, it would go down to that second line, which I believe was an additional 5 grants could be funded. And that would be just funded as they are listed here.
Yes, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, thank you. That was going to be part of my questions as well, especially and I think I knew the answer to the 150 question for the FAA match. The other is maybe an observation. When we talk about FAA match and priority 1 and AIP, the rules associated with what is funded by AIP or by BIL or any other federal grants have changed since then. And so quite maybe to the benefit of airport sponsors, there are some things in here that are hangar development, which is really priority 3, economic development. But because those categories have opened up, I guess my challenge would be, I think we should probably review what is priority 1 true infrastructure grant matching, because hangar development is great and all airports should work towards self-sufficiency, but that is not infrastructure in the ground to support the overall airport. That is to support the financial economic benefit of the airport. And on top of that, the larger spreadsheet that you sent, some of those ones are not at the 90%. Some of those are in the 70s and 80%, especially when we talk about hangar or taxi lane or development type of ones. If those were capped at 90%, or as Alex said, 95, because of the grant matching, One, it's economic development, so go find the other money for economic development to do hangar development if you're looking for a grant match. But like, what money could we pull back if we said, you know what, it's capped at 90%. And if you wanted 77% or 80%, go find that other 10 or 13% in your economic development to match that. We'll match the 10%. So I think there's a little more criteria development that probably should be some rulemaking between now and the next grant process, especially if FAA grants still encompass this larger sphere of what is eligible now compared to when this rulemaking was made. And so my question is, can we limit, say, priority ones to say 90%? Can we say as a board, we'd fund up to 90% of grants in those, so that would lower some of those numbers to allow more priority threes to potentially come in as well. Is that an option?
So the way it's laid out currently, the board can determine if they want to approve the amount that's been requested or a lesser amount. When it comes to like basing it on a specific percentage, I don't see why not. It just would be translating it into the dollar.
To the dollar amount. Okay, thank you.
Brian?
Comment and question with regards to both of your comments about putting the metrics together. As I read this, there's a base application score, maybe your GPA in the example, and then the act does a modifier on that. And ultimately, the application final score is directly related to the rank. And we're in this priority 2, priority 3 question, where if you look at the overall final application rank of phase of the priority 2s, they wouldn't fall in until 12 against priority 3 right now. So just the overall quality, according to this rubric, is quite low compared to priority 3. So as we try to refine this criteria, I kind of consider what that rubric is and how that final score is determined, and then maybe how that could interface outside of the priority 1 grant matching, maybe other dollar things. My question is based on the request of Klamath Falls to change its designation. The grant request, as I read it, is based on that already having happened at 178.
That's what we put it in as, yes, because we would want the board to approve that higher amount based on if the category change is approved later. Because if you approve the lower amount now and then approve the category change, so that's kind of the way we put it in. Yeah.
So they would get less if we don't approve the category change. That's
which is a future decision.
Right. Next one.
It's I would say it's a future decision, but it would be in alignment with how we are treating all other airports. So I don't anticipate that would be a challenge.
Okay.
That change. Klamath Falls.
That was my question.
Yeah.
They're not asking for a deviation. They're just asking us to recognize who they really are.
I see you, Klamath Falls. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
I have a few more questions unless anyone else wants to be in the queue. Okay, so, and I've been just kind of scanning this, looking at number of grants per airport that have been requested. So in addition to the, any that are above the 150 mark. And I think I've picked out 2 airports. Is that right, Andrea, on category 1? More than 1 grant request?
Actually, there are several in priority 1.
Counting 9.
Are there?
In category 1. In category 1. Priority 1.
Priority 1, yeah.
5, 6, 7.
Grant County, Hood River, Union County, Bend, and Salem, I believe, all have 2 requests in priority 1.
So I guess I would just say, I will put it out there. I really feel like, there's been a fairness issue around procedure this time. And it was different when we had all of the additional funds coming in through the recovery grants during the pandemic. But now we're kind of back to our normal budget for COAR. And so I don't think that it was understood by all of the airport managers that we state that there's a $150 million or $150,000 cap. But then kind of this hidden little asterisk that, but you can ask for more if you want to. That doesn't really make for a level playing field. And I can tell you, I think there are some airports in here that would have asked for more if they had thought that they could ask for more. So to me, that's a fairness issue. And then when we start looking at, okay, well, so maybe we do stick with how we have laid this process out, which is the 150,000 cap. But then there are some airports with multiple projects. So maybe the fairness part of that is to, fund projects up to the $150,000 cap, because some of the projects you just won't reach that level where they would need more funding and like 65,000 or something like that. But so I can see how there could be a good reason to allow for more than one project per airport, but keeping that cap in place of 150,000 per cycle. And then I guess, I don't know if folks have comments on that. I have one other thing. Anybody want to weigh in on that, Steve?
Karen, I like that. I just think about, especially for priority ones like this cycle and those that are anticipating that to match their FAA grant. If we're going to do that, I would recommend maybe that for future cycles and making that clear in the rulemaking for applicants. I'm just concerned about jeopardizing anybody's projects this cycle. That would be my only concern.
Yeah, and I get that, but I think we've already established that the priority one, those projects would move forward no matter if it's 150,000 or 250,000. Is that correct, Andrea? So all of the priority ones are already good to go.
Okay.
Funding level we set. And so then it's, kind of that fairness issue that I just brought up, right? And then also the multiple projects per airport, if we adhere to the same type of cap, because some projects are just not large enough to get to the 150 level. Any other comments on that about one thing? Okay. So, and then I know there was a question comment around the ODAV also asking for above the 150, but I think if you could get some clarity around that, because the PMP Region 1 and Region 2, that's not like one project. Those are multiple projects, right? Somebody wants to speak to that.
Yes, and the $200,000 ask on that was based on, we're looking at that to help fund the airport sponsors matches for their PMP work. And typically our PMP cycles are $1 million a year, and approximately 100,000 is the sponsor match. So that's how we decided to ask for the 200 with 100 for, 1 and 2, Region 1, 100 for Region 2.
And just for clarification, that money's being used for what again?
So the pavement maintenance program, it works a little bit similar in regards to the COAR grants, that when the state goes out to do the PMP work, we fund a certain percentage, and then the airport is required to fund a match. And they're actually the same exact match percentages and categories as the COAR grants. We kind of just, 10% is kind of the most common match for these airports. So that's what we based the 100,000 on.
ODAB has been covering the airport sponsor portion of the match for several years.
2021.
Okay.
Yeah.
And each region consists of, we can get exact airports and numbers, 10, 12, 16 airports would be receiving this PMP contracted work. It's not just, 1 or 2, if that helps. But the airport, it's the ODAB does not necessarily have to continue paying that sponsor match. We would like to. We do see the value in it. But if we don't have the funds, we don't have the funds, and then that sponsor match would go back to each individual airport to pay for it.
So Chair Stevens, just a question on that. The reason why I asked for the clarification, if it does come down to we drop these grant awards to 150, would there be interest from our group to keep that one at 200, even though we're saying we need to drop everything to 150, knowing that the money for that specifically actually goes back to benefit airports?
Airports, yeah.
Right. Yeah, and again, I asked for the clarification because not everybody understands the totality of that. So if there was an exception for that, I wanted to get that on the record.
That's a good example. Correct me if I'm, the question I guess would be whether it's 200 or 150, there's still a project sponsor component. You're just buying down the project sponsor's 10% component to a certain degree. So even in one, you're not with that 200,000, we're not buying down. There's no airport where there is zero contribution from the project sponsor. Am I correct?
No, that is not correct.
Okay.
So basically, and the whole reason why we even submitted this application is that previously airport sponsors could actually use FAA funds to help with that PMP match. And in 2021 is when that stopped being allowed. And that's when the agency started covering that. And so we haven't asked for any airport contribution, zero airport contribution since then. And that's kind of what we were looking to, at least because we've just done regions 3 and 4 to so that all 4
equal,
was kind of
okay
across the board there.
Yeah, and maybe just for our benefit, give us the reality check on these projects, and can these reports fund any portion of those realistically?
We had a survey that went out. Can you remember some of the results a little bit better, or we can send that out to the board. But just in some rough percentages, there was some airports it would not be an issue. Others can just flat out not afford it. So we could send what those results were out to the board. This is definitely not something that we would anticipate being a recurring ask. We either need to find additional funding so we can continue to pay that airport match, or it needs to go back to the airports and they start paying it at a certain point. So we didn't want to put ourselves in a position where airports were expecting to have to be paying it, and then we just tell them, hey, by the way, we're not paying it, go find the extra money, late notice.
Thank you, Chair. So if the funding was reduced to 150 from 200, would you be able to rank yours to help those that need it? And would you still be able to accomplish the PMP program and ask for matching from those that potentially can afford it?
We want to do our best to treat all the airports equally. We'd probably do something along the lines of going back and seeing what that percentage is. Are we paying 8% and then the airports need to pay the remaining 2% or whatever that number is across the board, rather than kind of picking and choosing airports? That's something we could do if the board's decision was to limit it to 150. We just reach out to the airports and that's where we go.
The airports that use that PMP funding, how many are not in NIPIAS? I'll ask it that way.
We'll have to get that number back to you.
Ballpark, just.
That's a good question. A rough number.
Majority.
Yeah, and if I'm just. So NIPIAS, we have 96 public use airports, about 67 or so in NIPIAS, I believe. And region 1 and 2, I'm going to phone a friend.
Yeah, that's, I guess what I'm getting at is
James,
they're not NIPIAS airports. They very likely have no other way to fund that pavement management.
Yeah, and that's true. And thank you, James Kirby with Century West. We primarily work with Century West on these PMP projects, and he just responded that about a third or not.
Okay.
Or no. Thank you, James.
So we could,
Oh, it's back. It was just.
It's back. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Sorry about that. I apologize.
Okay, any other comments, questions?
So just make sure I understand, back to his original question that started this. So is this the only line item that's very unique because it covers lots of airports?
Yes.
As opposed to every other line item. There's no other line item that actually is multiple airports. Okay, so that's what makes this line item unique.
Yeah, it's the state saying we want to
distribute
funding so we can help other
across the region, right?
As opposed to an airport wanting to do a specific project. It's for specific projects, paving generally.
Yes.
But the state is helping other airports with those paving projects.
Which I like.
That's pretty awesome.
If we had all 14 airports apply individually for $12,000, they probably wouldn't make it.
Yeah.
So this is a way of getting those help to those airports.
Okay, and I think that's why we've seen staff do kind of a regional rotation around the PMP projects, and that doesn't affect the SOAR projects, correct? This is completely separate from the SOAR.
It doesn't affect SOAR, but there are state-owned airports that do receive PMP work.
So let me ask staff this question. So here's a scenario for you, and you tell me how cumbersome or not this would be to process. Because the other thing is that we want to make sure we keep the priority one grants on track, because airports depend on that for their FAA grant cycle. So if we took all of the priority one and maxed them at 150, and then we allowed, if there were multiple airports, multiple projects for at one airport under the priority one, and we would allow that more than one project, but cap that amount total at 150. And then, so that that's the first, I guess, benchmark I want to talk about. I think we do need to have a little further discussion about these priority two, and maybe we can't solve that this time, because I think we do need some additional rulemaking on that. But then with that additional funding, and it will kick it down to, like you said, that line on priority three. So then we would just, as a board, need to make a decision about priority two and priority three. But as staff, how cumbersome is that scenario for you to manage?
Not at all. It's, I mean, the process is pretty much the same, no matter how you approve it. We just go in the grant system and we update it, information that needs updated, and push it forward. So yeah, not complicated.
Okay.
So Chair, let me just see, if you're not recommending capping the 150 for priority 2 or 3 for multiple
Oh, yes,
grants?
I would be recommending capping those, but
Everything.
I just think
Everything.
they're needed everything, but I think, I guess I'm having some angst around priority two, but I don't know that we can address that at this point.
Agree.
But there aren't any grants that are requesting more than 150,000 priority 2.
I'm having just an overall.
Yeah, the definition of
Yeah,
sure.
is in question.
We just need some better clarity around that.
Yes.
With staff and the board.
I was trying to say is that I like where you're going. It doesn't really affect the category 2. It actually expands priority 3.
Correct.
Correct.
But funding some of priority 2 over other projects within priority 3, I think is the tension.
Yeah, that's the category 2 actually.
Isn't that because it's
But right now, those are the rules we're operating under, right?
Can't change that this cycle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I would make a motion at some point that we ask staff to, update priority 2 rules.
Yes.
Yeah, with some rulemaking.
Second that motion.
This will be.
Got that noted.
So Chair Stevens, would it be inappropriate to get your thoughts on having our ARC representative who was overseeing this whole process to share some thoughts, anecdotal thoughts on what our deliberation has been? I mean, they're the ones that scored the grants, put in a lot of time. I think it would be beneficial if they had any of these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to hear what Shelley has input on. Shelley, are you still with us?
I'm here. I was just turning off my heater so you could hear me. We had quite the robust conversation, not just this year, but in prior years. And Jim can speak to a lot of the conversations that we've had on the ARC committee. It really, we do struggle with the statutes, the way they're lined out. It's really hard. And one of the conversations we did have is, and it came into play last year with the bill money, the bipartisan infrastructure law, because the ruling was changed last year to include the bill grants in the FAA, so they were automatically funded, more or less. But that also gave more airports the ability to have several AIP grants, which cut the funding down. We've also kicked around, we understand why priority one is always funded first, because we get to leverage our dollars, 10 cents on the dollar. That spreads the wealth around. But we've always struggled with, how do we make it that priority one gets some funded, priority two gets some funded, and priority three gets some funded? How do we figure out that break? What are the rules? And part of the thing with scoring is they're the same questions for the different types of grants. So they're the same 5 questions that we answer, that we rate. They don't necessarily meet the economic development, so you'll have lower scores, or the same thing with resiliency. Those questions don't really fall into those categories, or those categories don't really, it's like putting a round peg in a square hole. So we've talked about that at this last meeting, about seeing if there was a way that we could add some supplemental questions to help with the rating, because we would really, I'm a small airport. I'm the only grant writer. I have 1.6 FTE. So what the gentleman said about the 3.5 GPA, it's very true for a lot of the Oregon airports, is they don't have grant writers. They may have a council member. They may have a volunteer. And grant writing is not their expertise. And so they do the best that they can. But small airports live for these possibilities of grants. And COAR grant is one of the few grant systems available for them. So I'm right there with you. Anything, any way that we can improve or make it a better match for those grant funding priorities, 1, 2, and 3, I'm all for it. I have a real hard time asking for more than 150. I understand at times that you need to. And I know Connect Oregon does not work for most small airports because it becomes a political nightmare. So yeah, I mean, we've had several discussions and we don't have any really good answers right now. And I know everybody tries. Everybody tries. They put in multiple applications because they're hoping they get one.
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate your input, and it's I guess reassuring to hear that you also struggled as an ACT around these very same issues that we're discussing right now. Also, I'm a very good grant writer.
Yeah.
Brian.
Thank you, Chair. Shelley, as the statute's written, it's requesting additional information to justify the above 150K ask. And I'm curious the ARC got, and because I don't see that you guys adjusted any of the asks individually, it's kind of all or none as presented to the board.
And our conversation lasted quite a while on this. There were several of them that we looked at that we could possibly reduce down. And then discussion worked around what's fair, what's not fair. Was it fair to reduce one but not the other? In the end, after all the conversation, part of it was we looked at how far down the line in priority 3 we could get. And we understood that part of our thought process was also the bill money is a 5-year project. Well, at this point, 5 years. You maybe cut short on that with the new federal mandates coming down the line. So that's a rare opportunity for airports to be able to get some of that. And Steve Nagy is right. Some of the economic development under the bill money, which most small airports would never see in a lifetime if they didn't have the bill money. So we were weighing, it was like a minefield. Which way do you go? Because some of these small airports, in order to try and be self-sufficient, need that hangar built, but they can't get that hangar built because it's against FAA regulations for AIP, but yet the bill money is available now so that they can get the infrastructure in that they need to do the hangar, so that they can hopefully become self-sustaining or not run the risk of being closed because they aren't self-sustaining. So it's really hard to justify cutting them, but it's really hard not to have angst by not cutting them. And I know that probably sounds like a political speak, and it wasn't meant to be, but I'm looking at both sides. I'm on both sides, and it's really hard for some of these airports. That's their only opportunity that they're going to have to maybe get a step forward, where that it would not be there without that bill of money. So we did not feel at this point that it was the right thing to do by reducing them. And we felt either you reduce them all or you don't reduce them. And there were some that we thought that maybe could be reduced, but then on fairness, are you being fair? Are you looking at all the pieces? It was an extremely tough system this time. And part of it, and a lot of it is the bill money. But thankfully, these small airports do have the bill money. It's not a lot, but it's enough to at least get maybe one piece of a project going.
Yeah, thanks for your input, Shelley. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
I'm just asking clarification on going back to your last big comment. When you said people who have two applications, were you saying the total that they would get would be 150, so they would get 75, basically?
Or, well, I
Or
mean,
is that two,
it just,
or just pick one and cap it at 150, or?
no, I would say, you know, they put into the ones I'm looking at, neither, you know, they don't reach the 150 level, but
Okay.
combined, they are sort of close. So just allowing the funding up to that point.
So the combination,
Yeah.
that one airport would not get more than 150. If they had 5 applications in for 30, the one airport is capped at 150.
Correct.
Just making sure I understood you correctly. And I'm
Yeah, I would ask, I understand that too. I would actually ask staff to run the numbers in that instance. And would we actually be leaving money on the table? Because there are several airports that are in there with multiple 150s. And I don't think so,
Right,
but I think we'll probably go all the way down into the priority 3s, but I just would also not want to leave any money on the table and not award it, so to speak. So, I just want to make sure that doesn't happen either.
Maybe I don't know if you
that we become too restrictive, or not restrictive, but too directive, and then all of a sudden.
so also that incents the undesirable behavior that we just ask for one every time next year. Yeah. You're not going to get. You're just going to say give me 150, right? So there's the undesirable effect of that, right?
But that is how we operated before. Before we raised the cap at
Totally.
one point, right? So that
just pointing that out, right? So
to clarify, what you're saying is that if they have multiple applications, and say, okay, so they have 2 and both are at 150, you're looking at approving just one of those. But if they have multiple combined, no.
Well, just looking at the projects, I don't think we have that scenario. So what I'm looking at is, so just for example, the Grant County fuel upgrade and then the Grant County install runway PAPI system. So both of those are below 150. So what I'm saying is we could fund both as long as the total amount stayed under the 150.
Okay. So then if they have two applications and those two combined go over 150, you only want to approve one of them.
Well, I wouldn't, I guess in a perfect world, I would say you fund both the projects, but you only give them a total of 150 for.
Okay.
Rating.
So we're
Yeah,
not
the catch.
canceling
They could-
projects as we're just
they could choose.
adjusting the funding for them.
Yeah, I haven't looked at anything like that, but we could take a few minutes just to see what.
In that scenario, would we be leaving it up to the airport to decide on the amount then? For each grant?
And that's my question is,
Right.
I know we're looking at today's numbers, but I'm also thinking ahead, like we're gonna write policy on how we're gonna do this for the rest of the years. So we won't know the numbers. So should we equally divide it between the two projects or should we have the airport? I'm not sure, right? How to write the
Right.
policy for the next year's grant so people understand what's gonna happen.
I guess I would say
Okay.
for this year, maybe it would just be a percentage of based on what's, what am I trying to say? But you've got the two projects, they're over 150, you take a percentage of how much you have to cut from each. And then that's how you wind up with the final number. And I should say, I was only looking at priority one, because I think in priority three, there would have to be a cut made at least at one airport.
So Chair Stevens, again, I just want to make sure I understand what you're proposing. If somebody, if an airport has submitted something for priority 1, 2, and 3, they're only going to get funded up to 150, as opposed to some of the airports that have projects, like 2 and what is it, City of Crestwell, they've got 3 applications for priority 2. That would make sense what would make sense to me is if we keep the 150 per category, priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. If you put in 2 projects under priority 1, then you're going to get up to 150. But if you are in a different priority category, that meets different requirements.
It does.
And I think we should, really think about the benefits of the categories themselves. I don't think we should fault an agency for putting in the different categories, because with a lot of the grant programs I'm involved with, that has a different purpose. So is that something that could be considered by our group?
Yeah, that's actually, I agree with you. And that's really what I intended, is that by priority is
Okay.
that the caps would be imposed.
Good.
Oh, that's clear. That makes it clear okay, now
Yeah.
I think that'll help staff too.
Okay.
Yeah. Jim?
Why not let the airport choose rather than split the 150?
Yeah.
One of their projects could be far more important to them and more urgent than the other. So
They could work that
I
out.
think it would be better to let the airport choose.
Yeah.
What's that do for operations?
And I think they could work that out with staff. I think
Seems like
the main thing is we want to make sure we're hitting their grant cycle for the federal funding. And so, and then I think moving forward, we could probably have some better clarity around that by making sure we spelled out the rules, more clearly without this nebulous, well, you can ask for more.
And Chair Stevens, maybe one last consideration, assuming there is funding left over, right? I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're utilizing these dollars to the best of what they were intended for. Would it be unrealistic then to say, let's say there is an airport that put in for 2 projects, because they scored the highest, maybe we allocate some of that funding to the people that score the highest. Now, that does cause a challenge, because as we heard from one of our volunteers, not everybody's a professional grant writer, but it seems like the most logical way until we come up with a true rubric or metric on moving forward, so that we don't leave any money on the table.
Yeah, and I don't know, do you have a read on that? On if, and under this scenario, would we get all the way to priority 3?
Well, to muddy it even more too, we don't currently have a mechanism in statute or rule or even our processes to where, we would approve and start executing however the board decides that approval is going to look. But if, for example, a project doesn't happen because for whatever reason the FAA they don't get their FAA grant, or the airport decides to not do that project this year, we don't have a mechanism to then take that 150 and move it down the line to the next grant or two. So that just provides another, I guess, complication of, at least at this time, until we redo our statute or rules, we don't have that mechanism in place. So we just really have to base it off of whatever the board decides are going to be the approved projects.
And that's been the case in the past as well, right? Where if for some reason a project wasn't able to move forward, we did just put it back into the
General pool.
next time.
Yeah. So I feel like we're getting kind of to a point that doesn't feel very clear to me yet on how we're going to approve these projects.
Next year, why don't we start with priority one projects
Mhm.
and then see where we stand. And what to do, rather than trying to solve all
of it.
three priorities. I think the first one's the easiest one to do, I think. So,
Yes, I think you're right.
so we can move on.
Okay, so I think probably we can move to motions. And I can give a run at language if you would like that, or if somebody else wants to.
I can certainly try as well. So, and try this on for size for a motion, Chair. For priority one grants, there's a recommendation. The motion would be to approve the priority one grants with 150,000 cap for grant, and the 150 cap applies to multiple grants per airport sponsor for priority one.
I'll second that.
Right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion?
Any pain coming from staff on that?
Did you say you motioned and seconded?
Oh, sure, yes. So
I
Steve,
made
you
the
made the motion and got a second from Jeff.
So my question comment is to staff, you can do that. Okay. Just making sure that there's not a
Yes.
cause of pain.
Start using my brain a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. All those would be Sarah, if there was anybody.
It looked like Linda Tepper put her hand up momentarily.
There's a board vote though.
It is a board vote.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries for priority one projects.
I would make the same motion for priority two projects, that they're capped for multiples at 150, and approve the list as it's presented in front of us by staff.
I will second that again.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there discussion about priority two?
Same question. You guys can do that, right?
Yes, and just we recognize that in future cycles we'll
have a better
to see what other options we have, especially with the most recent FAA reauthorization, including resiliency, and just what flexibility we have in our rules and our.
Translating that we have an action item for this year to come up with clear rules for the next cycle.
Yes.
Right.
I didn't want to put that in the motion.
Yeah,
I
we
figured
can
that'd be
clarify
different from
that.
just approving the list in front of us.
It's not setting precedents for the future.
Correct.
Right.
All right, so we have a motion and a second for priority two projects. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, that motion carries. That motion came from Steve Nagy and the second came
And then
from Jeff.
I'll say for the third motion is similar to motions 1 and 2 for priority 3, with the exception that for the ODA grant, in order to maximize the grant efficiency and effectiveness, or grant effectiveness for for the airports in, region PMP and regions 1 and 2, that we accept that and allow that at its original 200,000 request, since that will be for the benefit of multiple airports, not a single airport sponsor.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Same question.
Staff?
Do that.
Yes, I have a question.
Chair, so now that we're rolling down, will this motion apply to leftover funding? So are we going to be then funding down?
Correct. So the additional funds in this motion, additional funds would fund more projects into priority 3 with the funds remaining from.
What order?
In the order, in the list.
That there's the order, in the order of the list. Okay, just making sure we state obvious answer, but just making sure we said it.
Good.
Right?
So,
And typically, we also do have the board do a motion to approve funding of the total amount for the cycle. So you would approve a full.
I finish this one first. Yeah.
But we can go down the list to that.
Yep. Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second for the priority 3 core grants. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries as well. Thank you for that robust discussion. Hey, that was a pretty heavy lift for a shorter period of time, and we plowed through that. So
Motion to approve.
so yeah, so we've got to approve the funding as well. I know we will do that. Don't worry. So I just need to make sure I have. This is the third. Agenda, is that?
It should be the very bottom one. So the draft motions are based on the parks recommendation, and then the very bottom one, I believe, is the funding.
Okay. All right, so you see, it starts with the approved funding authorization for 2024-2025 core grants in the amount not to exceed 4 million. So whoever would like to forward that motion, you can just say so moved.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Right, that came from, the motion came from me, second came from Jim Knight. We have a motion and a second, and any discussion?
It'd be nice to see a final document of how this all should be.
Of course, yeah, and we can ask that. Right, a motion is second. All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. There we go, staff, we got it done for you. Very good, thank you. How are we all doing on bio breaks, things like that? We may need to reshuffle our schedule a little bit.
For sure.
Should we take a 5-minute break? I know we're gonna run up on the lunch hour, but I'm.
Just wanted to thank Kelly for all her work and contributions and really clarification of the process from her perspective. So thank you very much, Shelley.
Yeah,
And I
thanks,
wanna-
Kelly. Appreciate that.
Echo
Thank you.
echo what Jim
Anytime.
said, but also to make sure we acknowledge the rest of the volunteers that Shelley got to work with.
Yes, thank you, Shelley.
Thank you, guys, and I look forward
All right.
to conversations later.
Yes, thank you. I think we've obviously started that discussion where we need to have some tweaks made to our process. So we will look forward to that coming in the future. Are y'all in agreement to take a 5-minute break? Okay, we'll do that. join up after lunch for the Aurora Master Plan update.
Great. Well, thank you and good morning, everyone. Just confirming, I don't have to unmute my screen. Everyone can hear me okay? And getting a nod from Sarah. So first, before I jump into the presentation, I did want to just provide some information on the comments that we had this morning. And so Mr. Mock, thank you for your comments. Do appreciate it. Thanks for coming by, and we look forward to discussing in our upcoming PAC meeting. Thank you. And
presentation?
not yet.
Not yet, okay.
And then on Charlie's comments, thank you, Charlie. We do understand the PAPIs are sorely needed at Independence. We actually have recently received a quote from a vendor, from a supplier on PAPIs. And right now we don't have funding to put them in right away, but we are looking at, FAA reimbursement and a project where we could replace both of the PAPIs at Independence. And that project calls for a shifting of the runway. And so the PAPIs themselves would shift as well. So we're looking at how we can implement that out there. And let's see on Mr. Henderson's comments. So some of that was probably a surprise to you. In October, when Mr. Henderson came and commented, there was some confusion over our airport land use compatibility guidebook and how FAR Part 77 surfaces affect development or obstructions outside of airports. And we have since met with him and clarified those issues. But we also, we started working on the appraisal that he mentioned, and we're discussing the potential for the state to acquire that property from him because of some of the challenges and the benefit that it provides to the airport. So that was something that we worked on. And as you mentioned, we did just meet yesterday to go over that appraisal. So happy to provide any additional comments or answers, discussion on that, if you would like. For Mr. Hillock, totally understand and agree that hangar space is in high demand, and I am going to have an update on Through the Fence. We are working on, we have a few locations where we can develop hangars, and we're working on a few applications we have for development in those locations at the Joseph State Airport. Let's see. And then for Betsy Johnson, same for the master plan. Appreciate her comments. And I spoke with her just the other day on the phone and encouraged her to attend our upcoming PAC meeting where she can give public comment as well. And then the last comment was we just discussed for COAR. So I'm going to share my screen. And you're with me. Okay, I think this will work. Yeah, okay. This is a photo of the Cape Blanco State Airport, and I have an update on that here in just a minute. Because we are in winter and expecting winter conditions throughout most of the state, I did just want to give a quick reminder that we don't have extensive plowing capabilities, but we are reporting surface conditions when we observe them. And then we are reporting, we are issuing NOTAMs that surface conditions are not reported when we can't observe them. And that's for all 28 of our state airports statewide. The most frequent issue or FICON NOTAMs that we're issuing are at the Joseph and the Aurora State Airport. We do not have de-ice capability at any of our state airports, and we do encourage pilots to just check in with us, check NOTAMs for the latest conditions, and let us know if there's anything else that we need to be aware of. This is just one of our three smaller trucks that have plows based here in Salem. We do have one larger but older truck over at Joseph. And again, we do what we can when conditions are suitable for plowing. And then just another reminder that our 4 seasonal airports are closed through May 1st, and that is an estimated date. We do go out and inspect those airports, put up the windsock again, and then if the conditions do not allow, we issue a NOTAM keeping them closed until they're suitable for operation. And then this time of year, the Pacific City State Airport, this photo was provided by the Friends of Pacific City State Airport. And this is the time of year the airport does receive some flooding. And I think we're past the worst of it with the king tides being over, but we do have remarks for the airport master record that it may be underwater during high tides.
Wow.
Or have occasional driftwood due to flooding. So just another thing to be aware of.
It's still on.
I think
Okay, just wanted to.
okay. Give me one quick moment. I'm gonna swap my. Apologize.
There we are.
I may have to swap the. It is thinking real hard.
Displays. And I don't pick up on display, but it's working.
Yeah.
I have to change the primary computer here. Give me a. I'm very sorry.
I think we've got it.
We're.
And everyone online.
Can we be heard? We are heard. I believe we are.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so this equipment is on order and we're expecting delivery either at the end of this month or by next month. And just in time before nesting season, so we can go out and hit some of our highest priority airports, especially in the south. So, and including at the Pinehurst State Airport, where we do have quite a few trees out in the safety area. Okay. So we are prioritizing, we expect to get great use out of this machine for several years to come. And then while we catch up on a lot of growth and then get into maintenance, but we're prioritizing the trees that are on state property at our airports and those airports that have projects. So Cape Blanco Airport, where we went in and did a bunch of work a year or two ago and still have some additional work there. The Prospect State Airport, where we are have a project coming up soon. And then a bunch of other airports throughout the state that have significant obstruction needs. Painting, this year we are looking at this list of airports: Bandon, Cape Blanco, Condon, Joseph, McDermott, South Bay, and Wasco. We have, over the last 2 years since we acquired the new machine, we have painted half of the state airports. And we estimated between 80,000 to 130,000 in savings by doing that in-house or per year. And that's not, it's a savings, but that's not that we paid that for a contractor to go do every year. We just weren't getting that work done. So we're doing it cost effectively, but this is a new level of service that we're doing in-house by getting these airports on a 4-year rotation to keep the markings updated. And we are listing, we have a lot of gravel, grass strips. They still have things that we do paint and maintain, windsock poles, tires to demarc, or other mats to demarc the thresholds and other things. So we do keep them on the list.
Quick question.
Yeah.
I think I know the answer, but I was just asking, who does the engineering for your painting and markings so that it meets legal standards? So who does that work?
So for a project where we have to put new markings down, we contract that, or it's part of our contract services with our consultant engineers, and primarily that's Century West. And then in-house, we're just refreshing what's already on there.
Just maintaining what you have. So
exactly. Just a quick project update. The Aurora State Airport, because my last update to you all was in October, I just wanted to mention that project did conclude, and it had its last coat of markings, and And if you haven't seen on Google Maps, Google Earth, they updated their satellite imagery with the latest, and it looks great. I should have included a photo here.
Bring it up at lunch.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. The upcoming, our next PAC meeting for the Aurora Airport Master Plan is February 11th. And then on the Cape Blanco runway rehab, so starting next week, we are resuming the closure. We reopened the runway when the pavement work was done and waiting just for longer lead times for electrical items. So those are now in stock, and we are getting back to complete the electrical work and wrap this project up by March is what we're anticipating. And then for Prospect, that runway reconstruction project, we are anticipating a 2-month closure starting this spring to do the full pavement and electrical improvements there as well. We did have a brief closure at Siletz Bay for partial electrical improvements, but we expect the bulk of the work with the pavement and electrical improvements to start this spring and summer. And we'll be sharing a bunch more updates on those. The Aurora State Airport obstruction removal, the EA rewrite that we have been anticipating for quite some time, we received the FONSI last month. And so we are now moving forward on appraisals for that and the other obstruction removal projects we have at Milano and Chiloquin. On Milano last year, we did complete the obstruction removal for on-state and properties that we had easements for those obstructions. And this is going to do the remainder of the trees that we don't have obstructions for.
Tony, what's FONSI? Sorry.
A finding of no significant. Yeah, sorry. I know if Kenji were here, he would have gotten on me about that. So technically, since our last meeting was December, we have had 0 new VPDs, but my last update was October. So we did have 2 after our October meeting, but knock on wood, those were the most recent. So I do, and I told the folks over at the Aurora Airport that I believe this is a result of everyone's combined effort, and really appreciate the steps people have taken so far. And we are continuing our work with them and developing driver's training. And I have been mentioning our rulemaking that we are anticipate bringing forward to the board here in the next meeting or 2. So we are continuing work on that. And I look forward to the discussion as we work on that rulemaking. Just a photo of the Cape Blanco State Airport. So this is with the pavement work done and the brand new markings. You can see here that we did reduce the runway width from 150 feet to 75 feet wide, but it maintains its full length. And this was late October. Our staff got out and got great photos with a drone. And we really look forward to unveiling the finished product here in the coming weeks. I have shared this information before. Just a reminder that the Salem Bay State Airport has a PPR, a prior permission required NOTAM issued. So this is a result of state parks completing a large scale project, and the park is closed outside of the airport grounds, but they have allowed folks to go access the airport. So that's where we have set up a prior permission required for full stop landings, and just trying to make sure that folks know, what the restrictions are and operating in accordance with those. On our homepage, oregon.gov/aviation, we have this link to subscribe to these emails for updates on whether it's the Salem Bay State Airport's operating restrictions or the Cape Blanco project and all the other projects I've mentioned. So we're sending out gov deliveries for all of those. And anyone listening, be sure to check for all of the topics for each individual state airport that they'd like to receive notifications for. And then you can also click the link at the bottom of a gov delivery notice to manage your subscriptions. Lastly, because I don't want to keep you all from lunch here, I'm right on time.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, so lunch hasn't arrived. So I did reach out to Mr. Hillick and I did want to have some discussion with the board, but mostly wanted to let you know in this meeting that that we have a number of airports with through the fence, and we do have a pilot program. We have the Aurora State Airport that's included in the pilot program, but then we have a handful of other airports with through the fence access, and we only have rules or policy on that pilot program. We don't have rules or policy on how ODAV should implement through the fence elsewhere. And I did put an asterisk because there is one policy, there's one rule, an administrative rule that that appears to be a kind of prohibition on through the fence until that airport is fully leased at any airport that doesn't currently have through the fence. So I look forward to having discussion with the board and also with airport folks from our, whether they're our tenants or just folks throughout the state on how and if the Oregon Department of Aviation should conduct through the fence access agreements at our airports. And if we do, how exactly should we do that so we can do it consistently and fairly? We don't have any guidance on that currently.
Yes. On the previous slide, you don't need to go back, but there was a through the fence non-aviation. What is that? What is through the fence non-aviation? How does that, what would that be?
Non-aviation.
Non-aeronautical.
Oh, yeah, Lebanon. It was for emergency access.
Fire access. Okay, yeah, gotcha. That had me head scratching for a second.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, it really picked up just to one hangar. Lebanon is really interesting where there's a bunch of hangars that go right up to the edge of the fence, and on the other side of the fence is a bunch of industrial buildings. So there's limited access. Thanks.
So the statute you just showed us, it's in the ORS?
Oregon Administrative Rule. Yep.
So back to the previous two slides, Tony. The Through the Fence pilot program was specifically designed for aviation use because airports can have through the fence agreements for non-aeronautical uses, like you said, for accessing a piece of property adjacent to you for emergency purposes. That's doesn't run in conflict with FAA. Really, FAA wants to put, the emphasis on through the fence aviation activity. So going back to your previous slide, we're really only talking the through the fence aviation activities are at Aurora, Independence, correct? And we're, of those, like you said, Lebanon is for non-aeronautical. So for Pacific City, those non-commercial residential, those are non-aviation or?
They're aviation.
They're aviation. Okay.
Yeah, everything except for Lebanon up there, I believe, is aviation. And so the pilot program specifically refers to industrial uses. So commercial aeronautical activities, and outside of a commercial agriculture operator at Wasco, Aurora is the only industrial or commercial operator through the fence agreement that we have.
Residential.
Right, and the rest are residential. So they're not necessarily part of that pilot program, and that's the gray area that we don't have yet.
But that wasn't that put in place, the pilot program at Aurora?
that was the original.
By the
original.
legislature.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Aurora is also the only one with a tower.
Right. So I'm just kind of bringing up that I expect we'll have some further discussion, and I'm happy to facilitate that both with the board and out with our pilot communities. But right now, because we don't have guardrails, we do have a number of applications for through the fence, and including people who have purchased property with the expectation that they would be granted through the fence. And so what what I have let people know now is that we are not going to grant through the fence until we have a mechanism to do that consistently and fairly.
And those requests are commercial and non-commercial? requests, or
both? Yes.
both? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then how do you see that policy making transpiring?
That would be a yes.
Okay.
Yes, that would be a rulemaking that we would bring to the board, and we would make staff's recommendation and bring the public input that we have. Also, we can have, the board can be included, and I believe should be included throughout that process as well. I look forward to bringing everyone together to talk about it.
So when you look back at the existing administrative rule, the goal with that language, as I read it, is to make sure that we're building out property on state-owned airports before we would allow for through the fence, right? Which goes directly to making sure those airports are as self-sustaining as possible. Okay.
Do we need a recommendation back to the staff here, or do we need direction, I guess, Chair, back to the staff? Or is that what they're looking for?
Already a motion.
Do you have a timeline for when you would bring that back to the board for proposing a rulemaking process?
I don't have a timeline. We do have, because we have the pilot program there's already some maybe framework present, and so we can, I don't know what that engagement, the outreach process is going to look like, just how many meetings are we going to have, but I do look forward to bringing this back within this year.
Well, and I guess I'm thinking, because you do have several requests that are with the agency right now that, I think we should definitely put a schedule together actively addressing those requests. And if that means that we need to spell out what a, rulemaking process is going to look like and put some timelines to that so that those folks asking for this understand what those timelines are, I think that's a fair thing to do.
Sure, and I'd recommend, I personally, like to have board or input or participation with some work sessions during that as part of your outreach as well, not just until the product is ready to come to us, but I think that at least having some work sessions with us would be good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will for our next our next board meeting, I will have an update on the schedule and some process, and if the board wants to select committee members to sit on those rulemaking discussions, happy to include them.
Right, and I would say in that framework, when you're bringing that back to us, just make sure you're educating us all on our airport sponsored grant assurances so that we understand the framework that we're having to work from as far as how the grant assurances should be informing policy.
Yeah. Yeah. And so part of this is answering the question of, should we do this? And because the board is ultimately going to approve any rulemaking, I guess if the board wanted to have some discussion and then provide feedback back to staff or inform, this process as we have those discussions, then I think that would be an important consideration.
Very good. Any other questions for Tony?
Isn't it through the fence issue that we're talking about, you're just talking state-owned airports, or are you correct? All?
Yeah, this would affect only state-owned airports where adjacent properties that are federally owned would access the public use state property.
Didn't want Steve to go crazy. Wait a minute, it's my airport.
It's only for state airport.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
I think that brings us up to lunch. So we will break for half an hour for lunch and then come back. And next on the agenda will be the Aurora master plan.
Just one quick second.
Mute this off.
Let's give not a quick second.
Okay, and we should be back now.
Okie dokie. Welcome back, everybody, from our lunch break. We're going to move into the Aurora Master Plan update. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, so everyone can hear, correct? Okay, getting the thumbs up. So good afternoon again, and ODAV staff and Century West are really happy to provide this update on the master plan project. Our last update was September in a work session, and just like in that meeting, we want to be respectful of the public process, and if the board has any clarifying questions, we're happy to answer those. If the board has input they'd like to provide, please provide those through Chair Stevens, who is our board PAC representative on the master plan. We are going to provide an update since that September meeting, but and we have shared the refined preferred alternative with the PAC, but we have not yet discussed it in the meeting with PAC. So there may be questions, or if there are questions, we may not be able to answer those until we've had an opportunity to have that meeting with the PAC here on February 11th. And then again, if you want to get your questions, if you do have any on the refined preferred alternative, to Chair Stevens, and then we can get those answered next week. With that, Century West, I believe, is on the call, and I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you, Tony. And let me see if I'll click the right button here. Hopefully it will share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Make sure I don't push the wrong button here. Okay, so is that a full screen view for you all?
Not really.
Yeah, it looks windowed.
Okay, let me push a couple more buttons here, see if I can figure out how to do this. Skills.
That's good.
Better? Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much. So thank you, Chair Stevens and board members. I'm David Miller, a member from our last briefing in September. I'm the lead airport or aviation planner for Century West Engineering, and we're the lead consultant for your Aurora State Airport Master Plan. I've also got on the call today with us James Kirby, who is our technical lead on all things engineering at the Aurora State Airport. So if we have questions that James can help clarify, then he's available to jump in. Let's see here. Stand by. So I'm sorry, trying to figure out my buttons here. Okay, so we've got a fairly brief presentation today. I know your time is valuable. We'll try to keep this concise. So just as an agenda overview, we're just going to provide an update where we are in the planning process, as Tony alluded to. And really, since the last board meeting presentation in September, we have reviewed the preferred alternative with the PAC and also looked at refinements to that. So that occurred during PAC meetings 7 and 8 in October and December. And then there's more information on next steps on the project website. So just a quick overview on the schedule. We are over on the right side, close to that "We Are Here" arrow. Essentially, the next PAC meeting, as Tony mentioned, is on February 11th, and that'll be our 9th PAC meeting. We've also had a number of study sessions, work sessions with the PAC and public open house. So that is drawing, as you can see from the graphic, that is drawing us to the last couple of pieces of the process in terms of taking the preferred alternative and finalizing the draft airport layout plan and a capital improvement program. So again, a little recent history. So as I mentioned, the preferred alternative was presented to the PAC meeting on October 15th. There was feedback provided at the meeting, and then subsequently And the next scheduled PAC meeting, which was held on December 10th, was actually, we made an adjustment based on the input that was provided during the PAC meeting 7 to provide an opportunity for more collaboration with the public and the PAC. So the December meeting was really a discussion, a roundtable, letting all the members provide input on the preferred alternative that was presented back in the October meeting. We also presented the preliminary noise analysis, both current year and long-term noise exposure maps for that. And then, as Tony mentioned, based on the feedback that we were provided following PAC meeting 7 and 8, during and following, refinements were made, some evaluations occurred within ODAV's staff, and refinements were made to the preferred alternative, and that preferred alternative graphic was posted on January 6th. So it's been available for public review for about a month, and we continue. So again, this is kind of looking backward a little bit. This is what was presented at the PAC meeting number 7 in October, and it was essentially the preferred alternative, the goals of which were to, this was through the long process of evaluating things like the east shift of the runway versus the west shift, or the highway versus the runway shift, the north extension or the south extension, things like that. So this preferred alternative really zeroed in on the Hubbard Highway and Kyle Road realignment, removing the drain field in the runway safety area at the south end of the runway, relocating some of the non-standard items in the object-free area, the weather system and AWAS and segment circle. And then it looked at property acquisition related to all of that, and then some other improvements to open drainage ditches on site. There were projects that were part of that preferred alternative that included the proposed parallel taxi lane along the east side of the parallel taxiway, and also a proposed vehicle service road that would run parallel to the runway taxiway system. Those recommendations came through the planning process and were suggested by PAC members, and I think there was some direction from the runway safety action team as well. So that's why they ended up in the preliminary preferred alternative. I think what we distinguished at the time and since is that the first group of projects were really required to mitigate FAA non-standard FAA conditions. The latter group, the safety or the parallel taxi lane and the vehicle service road, were really intended to improve efficiency and safety. They weren't necessarily intended to correct a deficiency in standards, and that's kind of where the distinction lies on those two. So this is the graphic that was, again, this was the preferred alternative that was presented back in October and again discussed in our December meeting. And if you recall from earlier presentations, the preferred alternative really contained 4 phases, and they were not in any particular order necessarily, but we distinguished between bringing the runway object-free area, runway safety area up to standards, which meant removing a lot of the conflicting items like the Hubbard Highway, Kyle Road, et cetera. There was the runway extension piece at the north end. There was the vehicle service road piece and the taxi lane, the parallel taxi lane. So we pointed out that this view represented the long-term development picture for the airport, and that those individual phases were intended to be implemented sort of on a not necessarily a sequential basis, but they were individual projects that could be undertaken. A lot has been discussed about the reserve, the property area, the yellow shaded area. This is simply an area that was identified as off-airport property, currently in aeronautical use for the most part, that could be incorporated into the airport if there was a situation where there was a willing seller that wanted to approach ODAV and sell property. Showing that property reserve on the airport layout plan opens the door to using FAA funding for that. There was no intent by ODAV to actively pursue property acquisition for that, through the fence developments, for example, other than property that was needed for the conformance to the FAA standards. So the input we received in the during and following the PAC meeting 7 and 8, so October and December, was that there was, the development options were what they are, but we should really be considering a no-build action. And that was just simply do nothing and avoid the changes. That was not carried forward because it failed to meet the FAA's requirement that the airfield meet standards for runway safety area and object-free area on the approved plan. Also suggested input was to reduce or eliminate impacts to the existing hangars, predominantly on the east side, the large collection of hangars on the east side at the south end. Also, just input that the parallel taxi lane wasn't needed. It might be nice, but in this situation, really not necessary. It was also proposed that the vehicle service road that was proposed be relocated off airport property through the fence hangar area. And we pointed out during that conversation, or those conversations, I should say, and I think FAA weighed in on this as well, that the airport master plan is focusing on ODEV-owned property. So improvements that would occur off airport property, ODEV-owned property, would not be part of the master plan. And there were some conversations about whether the property needed to accommodate the vehicle service road could be purchased or leased. There was a lot of back and forth on that. So that was, it was essentially the case that ODEV would not be funding projects off airport property. So unless that changed, that was sort of the distinction there. There's also quite a lot of conversation about the drain field at the south end, and I know there's been a lot of back and forth, and this is where James could jump in if I get too far off track, but our basic approach was the drain field as it currently exists does not meet FAA standards, and either on grade and surface compaction, and also the ability to bear weight of a vehicle or an aircraft over top of the drain field, which is within the safety area. And then the highway, there was a shift. There's been a lot of conversation about the need to shift the highway, and if so, how much. And we reported that our planning assumptions were based on input provided by ODOT during preliminary conversations, and it's very conceptual. And their basic feedback was that their preference would be to keep their existing right-of-way width. So all of our options related to that brought the road and the right-of-way over necessarily, and keeping the roadway centered in that. So that's kind of the feedback we heard. So based on that, both, as I said, at both of those meetings, and a lot of comments that were provided through the project comment apparatus through the website, the refined preferred alternative was posted on or published on January 6th. So the main changes between the original and the refined version is that the east parallel taxi lane and the vehicle service roads were removed. Eliminates the need to acquire property that would have impacted a large group of hangars along the southeast side of the airfield. And by eliminating the vehicle service road component, there was also the ability to return some aircraft parking, helicopter parking positions that were eliminated in order to accommodate the vehicle service road. And the big takeaway on that is that it reduced the required property acquisition to just the areas needed to meet the FAA object-free area, taxiway object-free area, runway object-free area, and runway safety area standards. The reserve is still identified simply to keep the door open if there's a willing seller that approaches ODEV, and they could then potentially use FAA funding to acquire property that becomes available. And the underlying intent with that was to ensure that the adjacent lands which are in aeronautical use stay in aeronautical use, which I know that is the current intent of the owners, but as an airport owned land, that would ensure that. So there were some changes based on that, but then there were a number of items that remained unchanged from the preliminary preferred alternative presented in October. The north runway extension, the relocation, removal of the drain field outside the south end of the runway safety area, open ditches, so the ditch that runs along the parallel taxiway would need to be covered as well. And the shift of the Hubbard Highway and Kyle Road outside the object-free area, relocation of the ASOS and the wind cone, some reconfigurations of apron tie downs or mentioned earlier, and then also the hangar sites that are on ODAV on property. And the refined version of that looks very much like the other, with the exception of the impact up. I can't see my cursor, I'm sure, but over in this was the area that was most directly affected by the proposed parallel taxi lane in the vehicle service road. So with that, we're good on time, so I can go through the next steps. Tony's already alluded to this. Our next meeting is next week, Tuesday on the 11th. We'll be presenting and discussing with the PAC the refined preferred alternative. We are also we will be presenting the draft capital improvement program. We presented preliminary cost estimates at the earlier meetings that were our first run at the costs, including property acquisition. And we have refined those numbers as well to reflect the most recent changes and refinements in the preferred alternative. There's obviously a significant cost savings with the elimination of hangar acquisition on the east side, for example. So that also takes the costs and the projects and sort of divides them into short-term and longer-term projects. So really, we're looking at the next 5 years and then beyond. So that is going to be presented to the PAC as well. And then the draft airport layout plan drawing set. Right now, the airport layout plan drawing, the terminal area plan, are the sheets that contain most of this information. So we'll be presenting that. Next, beyond that, or one of our final steps in this process would be to prepare the draft final report and draft airport layout plan drawing set, which will be submitted for ODAV review. It'll be available for public review and PAC review. And it ultimately is submitted to the FAA office in Seattle, where it will they'll coordinate the official FAA review. Normally, and I say normally because there hasn't really been much about this project that's been normal in terms of timeline. The normal time frame for an FAA review on a draft final airport layout plan and master plan document is 90 days. So we're hoping that all the lines of business and the airspace reviews are completed within 90 days. So that will be a spring submittal to FAA, and that would suggest that they would be looking at final review completion by early summer. So with that, I think I will stop.
All right, thank you so much. We'll take some questions from the board. I have one for you right off the top, which is, could you give a little more detail around the drain fields and just, I know you've all explained this before, but just a little more detail about the challenges around the drain fields where they are now and why the need to move them, or to, I should say, not necessarily move them, but to find a different solution.
Chair Stevens, could you have them go to the graphic just so
Yeah,
we can see where that's at?
Sure.
I'm kind of a visual person.
So we're talking.
Yeah, there you go. So the green areas.
Sure. Yeah, the green. Okay, very good question. Thank you, Chair Stevens. So this is where I'm going to lean on James Kirby if I get. So I'm the planner in the world, and James is the engineer. So it's an engineering issue. I'll describe it as best I can, and then James, feel free to jump in. So the first part of the answer is that when the drain field was constructed many years ago, the design standards that were applied to runway 1735 were in the B2 category. And what that really means is that the runway safety at that time did not extend that far south. So with the C2 standards that have been in place now for a number of years, the drain field is not considered compatible with FAA runway safety area standards. So the question, why then, or why not then, and why now? That's really because the standards that are in place today, the footprint of the protected compacted surface, that runway safety area, has grown. James weighed in and gave me some feedback on a couple questions earlier, and basically what it amounts to is the under current C2 standards, which have been in place for quite a long time, isn't really a change based on future activity. It's what we need today. The drain field doesn't meet FAA grading standards or load carrying standards. So there are a lot of design related issues with that. So the simple issue is in the FAA world is the drain field doesn't meet FAA standards currently, and the FAA looks to the plan to recommend a way to correct or mitigate that. So this is something that ODAV and the FAA have evaluated, made some preliminary decisions on, and the recommendation from the plan is to relocate the drain field outside the RSA. That's kind of where that goes. I think, this is a great example of something where when the airport master plans, as you all know, are conceptual planning tools, and that the recommended projects are refined through both design and environmental processes. So, at this point, sorry, I should be out of time here. Sorry. So the design process can end up with some refinements. So just as a conceptual guide, the recommendation is to remove the drain field to meet the standards. I know there's been a lot of conversation between the tenant. The drain field is on the leased piece of ground, so that I expect that will continue. But from a planning perspective, the FAA priority is to clear the runway safety area.
I just have a couple of follow-ups on that then.
Mm-hmm.
So forgive my ignorance, but what are the drain fields being used for exactly right now? And what would be the fix for those areas then? And then Tony, I've got a safety question for you next.
I would defer to Tony on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll answer that first question. There are a few different drain fields. So we show 3 in this image, and the south end, which is on the right side of the screen, that is the primary drain field that's kind of in the focus of the discussion, and it's really the runway safety area. And this was identified, I want to say 3 years ago, and we've had a fairly significant discussion on it over compliance with the FAA standards for safety areas, and then as we've worked through the master plan process, we've taken a holistic look at our drain fields. We have a couple others. David, if you're able to go just to the left.
Yep.
To the midpoint of the airfield.
Tony, can I just ask you, so
Yeah.
is it just literally like runoff from other parts of the airport, or what is it?
Sorry, so this drain field, this is for waste discharge for the south third or so of the airport from off airport or private property.
So they're runoff, right?
Septic.
Sewer
run.
All right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So mix of I don't know if these are the correct terms, but gray and brown water. But it is specifically septic for the through the fence uses on that south third or so of the airfield. And then similarly on the midpoint, just north of the state apron and hangar area, there's a little arrow pointed, labeled there, corner of drain field, and that's within the taxiway safety area. And that also is for those white box hangars, which are also private through the fence hangar uses. And so part of that was, it was an existing drain field, but the runway extended. Same thing for the south end as well. The runway back in the late 2000s extended to the south. And so then we found ourselves with this condition where the drain field's now within the runway safety area. So similar thing here with the parallel taxiway. And then on the north end, that is for Columbia helicopters, that drain field, which currently is outside of the safety area, but as shown with the 497-foot runway extension to the north, would become within the RSA.
And all of them are for
sewer
and
gray and brown.
Yep, gray and brown.
Gray and brown. Yep.
Okay.
And then, so my safety question is, what happens when an aircraft comes in and is short on approach, or it has an excursion off the other end, what is the safety issue?
The standard for runway safety areas is that the area under dry conditions can support the weight of aircraft and emergency equipment without causing excessive damage to the aircraft. Because the drain field naturally introduces moisture to the field, it is not allowing proper drainage, and it is exacerbating the or James could really provide a bit more technical response here, but it does not allow for it to support that aircraft or emergency equipment because it introduces moisture.
Right.
And then there's
And that's
also
actually, that's an FAA requirement, right?
For
That
runway safety.
any runway safety area be able to withstand the weight of an aircraft or an emergency vehicle, correct?
Yes, but there's also there are tiles and other vents and other equipment within that drain field that may not be frangible, or we're looking at, does it meet OFA and RSA requirements as well?
So break that down for us, because I know what frangible is, but
So the FAA requirement, I'm sorry to.
It's okay.
Yes, the FAA requirement is 3 inches above grade, that it has to break away without causing excessive damage to the aircraft or causing loss to direction. And so that's something we're looking at. Because the drain field is there, you can usually spot it on a map because we're not able to get in there and mow it. So it also creates a vegetation control issue that we can't go in and mitigate wildlife hazards, and just, again, best management and drainage, encouraging proper drainage of the safety area.
Yeah, I could add one more thing to that too. One of the big things about RSAs is grading requirements. They have to meet grading standards in terms of the amount of vertical curves you place, the lips, the dips, the humps. And this particular drain field, as well as others around the airport, because the water table at the airport is fairly high, they've been forced to use in a lot of cases a capping fill design, which means there's actually a hump out there where the drain field is as well. So the grade rises at the edge of the drain field, stays high through the drain field, and then drops at the edges. So there's actually a non-standard grading condition to go with that as well, besides the non-load bearing structures and those kind of things too.
Thank you, James.
Where would the drain field be moved to?
So that in the current configuration, there's no airport property that the drain field could be moved to that we have identified. And at this point, and what we identified about 3 or so years ago, was that the drain field just needs to be outside of the safety area. I did want to point out that we have been working with the lessee for that drain field on some improvements they claim will help make it meet FAA standards. We have had a lot of back and forth on that, and we have not had all of our questions answered to our satisfaction. So right now, our position is that it still cannot meet standards, and the drain field needs to be taken outside of the safety area. Safety is absolutely a concern of ours, and we do not want to cause any excessive damage, personal injury, or death as a result of a non-standard condition on our airport.
Do you have on any of the other state-owned airports, are there drain fields in any other RSA? No.
And the FAA's direction on this is?
We had some back and forth with the FAA when we initially were looking at this, and the direction we formally received was evaluate it through the master plan. Our evaluation is the drain field needs to be taken outside of the safety area.
Great, thank you.
So whose responsibility would that be?
Per our that's a contractual condition in our lease agreement, and the termination and restoration of the premises is explained in that agreement, and that would without looking at it directly, that would squarely be the lessee's responsibility.
Changing the subject a little bit, looking at the property acquisition around this proposed master plan, how many buildings would be taken out?
That's
zero.
On
Really?
the
'Cause
airport buildings, is that a question about airport owned or air hangars, et cetera? Or
I'm assuming. So when we look at the yellow area is if it would be designated so that down the road, if the state wants to purchase that property, that's what it's going to be designated at. But when we look at the shaded area, it does look like it's going to affect a couple buildings.
It's the ramp.
Just up to the front, just the ramp. Just the ramp.
The blue shaded for priority acquisition does not, at least on the airport side, does not impact any existing structures in airdock use. There, with the highway relocation, there would be some structures, some houses impacted on the west side, but on the east side, there's no structures impacted by this refined preferred alternative.
Now, looking at all this, if the master plan were to be accepted, does that mean that the road has to move immediately? Or is that just in 100 years, the goal is to get the road moved?
The master plan looks at a 20-year plan period, and we part of the CIP that we're going to be sharing soon, we'll look at the timeframe for that project. So we will answer that question if ever relevant.
But that could go beyond the 20-year master planning timeframe, correct?
It all depends on when its funding is available. Exactly. It's all contingent on funding and, right. Tony, maybe just a more simple question. How long has the airport been in a C2 category? Since the previous master plan, since about 2012. Okay. And that's when the FAA moved it into this, through the master planning process, moved it into the C2 category. And so compliance with C2 standards has been essentially in the air since that change in category, design group category. It was a recommendation of the last master plan to evaluate compliance with design standards then. Okay. The recommendation was to obtain a modest standard, which we attempted on multiple occasions and were not granted. It's not the FAA's mode anymore.
Oh. And just to piggyback on that, so the 2012, when that designation was made, it's because we already had that aircraft activity level.
Correct. And so this master plan, so yes, the design aircraft was a C2 then, and this master plan has, through its own analysis, looked at the traffic and determined the same C2 aircraft is the design aircraft for this planning period. And that's an existing and future condition throughout. And since the last master plan, it's consistently been operating operationally wise with 500 and or more greater C2, D2 operations. Correct. Every year since then. Okay. Or at least, or I don't want to say every year, and maybe David could explain more of that, but at least through our inventory, chapter 2 inventory.
Forecast period.
Yes.
Yeah, you're correct, Tony. I think as we talked about in the forecast, what we were able to document through various means is that the airport clearly is in the design group 2 category, has been for many, many, many years, even before the 2012 plan. And the combination of approach category C and D aircraft, which effectively are combined because the design standards are the same. Yep. Those numbers applied to the design group are applied, and then the design group 2 numbers are applied. So C2 is effectively representing the critical aircraft or the design aircraft. So those standards were, or that traffic was evaluated, prior to the last 10 years or so, in terms of instrument flight plan data and that kind of thing. And Tower, of course, doesn't track by aircraft type, by design group, but that was all detailed in the forecast, which the FAA did an extraordinary amount of review on and ultimately approved the forecast. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just wanting to, make sure that we're on record as understanding that C2 has been there for a while, is well established, and through the planning and through the forecasting process has been demonstrated that that is the airport's design category, C2, D2.
That's correct. Yeah, and, a similar point was C2, yes. I think also there was a comment made earlier in reference to runway length and extension. I just want to tie that back to your comment earlier, and that is the analysis that was completed in the facility requirements section of the master plan determined that where we end up with this 497-foot runway extension, that length, that ultimate 5,500-foot length, is justified today, based on the design aircraft and the category of aircraft. So I think there's maybe a misunderstanding or a misconception that the extension is just intended to accommodate larger aircraft. And that's not really the case. The fact is, if you extend the runway, then potentially larger aircraft could use the airport, but that isn't the intent of the design. It's really to accommodate the traffic that's there now.
And David, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the runway length analysis, that is to capture 95% of the fleet mix at 60% of load. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that's the metric that we used, right? So yeah, it's a wide swath of the fleet in that category, but it isn't the highest level, if you will, that 100% of the fleet at a higher useful load. It's the level that the FAA supported through the analysis and forecast.
So even the aircraft using the airport today are still operating at a reduced load.
So
even at that 5,000 constraint.
Right.
Yeah.
Even at that, some will be constrained in operations during certain times, in certain conditions.
And we find that at virtually every airport we work at, summertime conditions, hot weather, hot day, density, altitude, there are just some aircraft that need to reduce their takeoff weights, their passenger fuel loads. It's very common. So, yeah.
Okay. And because I know Ms. Johnson wanted to speak after our conversation here, so I'm trying to hit on some of her points.
Right.
And so, she mentioned, this is a $180 million project over time that she says is not achievable, and that it puts a cloud of uncertainty over leaseholders. But in this scenario, there's nothing changing for the leaseholders, correct? Other than the drain field issue that we're discussing.
Correct. Yep. The drain field will be the only lease change outside of some reconfiguration of some hangars to maximize, because that was one of the main outcomes of the facility requirements, land side anyway, was looking at maximizing hangar storage. So on one of the aprons on ODAP's property, David, if you're able to just go back a little bit north, we are just showing a reconfiguration, but that's again just to maximize hangar storage. So we would be looking at continuing working with our existing tenants on those changes.
And again, to maybe address some of that concern or question, all of the yellow that's identified as future acquisition is willing seller, willing buyer type of thing. It's very common practice to show on a master plan. Future acquisition doesn't mean that you're going out in any way actively, but if sale becomes available, then that's identified as additions to the ALP, additions to the airport.
Correct. Which having it on the master plan allows us to do that with federal funds. And we've had multiple requests from private property owners through the fence access to have us acquire throughout this process.
Right, but that doesn't change the uncertainty of the other property owners that they can own their property as long as they choose to own their property.
Correct.
So that doesn't introduce any uncertainty there from that perspective. Okay, thank you.
And then the other point that Ms. Johnson made was that the road realignment, the road moving the Hubbard Highway, she asserts that this would never be funded by ODOT. But that's really not our issue, right? Our issue is making sure that our master plan will be accepted by the FAA.
Correct. And
Oh, I'm sorry, Tony.
oh, I was just going to add, I mean, I think many of us that are airport sponsors have similar type of issues where roadways or other public improvements either traverse a runway protection zone or some other building restriction area. And the FAA wants us to identify those, the ultimate configuration for them, and then to work with those other jurisdictions, whether it be city, county, state, so that as they are developing their transportation plan, long range, they can incorporate these into those. So as an example here, if there was ever a redesign or reconfiguration of Hubbard Highway in this area, they are on record through the FAA and through this process, you know, what configurations for these interchanges and intersections in the future would look like, so that in this case, ODOT could take that into their planning. There might be a federal component at that time you would want to participate or get FAA participation for to make up the difference for relocation for interchanges or those, but that's again negotiated as part of either when, excuse me, from what I understand, from when either ODAV moves this forward or when ODOT, the owner of this roadway, moves it forward in cooperation together, you'd have that conversation, correct?
Yeah, we have had conversations with ODOT and they said that this would require further, you know, planning and adjustments to their plans, which they discussed their process for doing.
Right.
So the other piece is the airport master plan. Once it is accepted by the FAA and then approved by the board, it then goes into a series of adoptions into other transit plans, right? And I know the name of them for my region, but not necessarily for this region.
Yeah, for compatibility with our local comprehensive plans. And that's what we're working on as well.
So that would be memorializing that, you know, this has been studied. And so when ODOT goes to do their master planning, then they can see that this has been a recommendation that's been made, right?
And the other jurisdictions in their
Region 3 on the thing, and then Marion County master comprehensive plan.
I was going to say, and then other regions for whether it be county or city for their comprehensive plans, this would get folded into as well.
Also point out for someone who lives right about, last 4 years, ODOT's been actively doing a lot of work on 551. Both intersections at the airport are totally different since I first moved in there. They're rebuilding the Aurora interchange. There's a lot of activity on the traffic flow that you're looking at right here.
And so, and, you know, I guess we should also acknowledge that, yes, a master plan is a 20-year planning tool, but master planning doesn't have to be limited to 20 years. And so taking a look much further out, I mean, just for my experience at our airport, we looked out 50, 60 years because we want to make sure what our 20-year plan is not going to cause a problem out in the whatever the 50-year mark might look like. So including this in a plan now puts us in compliance with what the FAA expectation is, but then also kind of sets that framework forward.
Yes, I was going to add on to that. Our conversations that we were party to with some of the ODOT folks last summer, I think our conclusion, our planning assumptions were based on the fact, and so this was validated by some of the comments by some of the ODOT staff, was that their preference would be to keep the existing right-of-way width for the reasons that you all mentioned. They haven't even contemplated long-term what change to the Hubbard Highway would be needed in terms of number of lanes, divided lanes, signalization beyond what's already planned. So they're just operating as a conceptual planning approach. Let's keep our options open. We'd like to keep the right-of-way as wide as it is today. Shifting it really didn't present a technical problem for them, they stated. But having said that, there are questions about, at the end of the day, and also the fact that whatever the highway design ends up being, it's really in the purview of ODOT. This isn't an ODAV decision. And once that environmental and design process runs its course, the final configuration could be quite a bit different than the conceptual. So this is, as was stated, this is really just a placeholder. But it's a very long and complicated process anytime you're dealing with highway right-of-way and property acquisition or right-of-way acquisition. So that's understood. The other point I was going to make, and it kind of ties into the earlier observation that this is a 20-year plan, but the likelihood, given the complexity of these issues and the complications, is that implementation of this master plan is likely to take well longer than 20 years, at least for complete implementation. And I think, as Tim House from the FAA has said a number of times, it's a plan, it's a goal, it's a target, and the FAA is looking for incremental steps to work toward that. So no one, I mean, at FAA or anyone else, believes that all this work would be completed in one single project in a brief period of time.
David, if I can just jump in too, I wanted to comment on one other thing that you had mentioned on the funding or the cost for the projects. So we haven't updated or we haven't shared the most current cost in our planning level cost estimate for the overall project shown, but it will be substantially less than the original 185 million.
Because
and that's
scaled back.
Because we have scaled back on a lot of the hangar property acquisition, the existing hangar property acquisition, and the construction of the taxi lane. So that will have, I think, a very positive impact on the overall costs that, again, we look forward to sharing February 11th. And even then, the FAA has been very encouraging and supportive of us achieving standard because, as you said, they are really pressing for areas in our region to work on some significant standards issues. We believe that funding, this is realistic, this is feasible, and so that's what we feel.
One other, I guess, kind of observation along through the process, and certainly through your comments to us over the year or years, approval of this plan and addressing these non-standard issues is part of the FAA's, I wouldn't say contingent upon continuing to fund improvements on the airport, not addressing these issues, addressing them in the plan and then having a follow-on as to when they are actually improvements can be made. But ignoring and not addressing these in the plan is a non-starter from the FAA's viewpoint, because then we're not talking about access to federal funds to do anything, like even maintain the runway, maintain the airport, the existing infrastructure that is there.
That's exactly.
So approving a master plan that has some long-term changes in the both on airport and the surrounding community allows, if it addresses them, again, may take a long time to do, either through ODOT or, property acquisition takes a long time to do as well. But that also allows the more immediate and intermediate things to be done. Pavement, runway work, pavement management, the runway extension, all the things that are key to operation at the airport are contingent upon addressing these non-standard issues from FAA's perspective. And that's what I think we've heard from you quite loudly over the years.
Exactly. And one great example of that is our runway safety action team. One of the action items is for new signage. We have very little lighted signs on the airfield, and it's nowhere near sufficient for all the connected taxiways and everything that we have. That we could not fund that project with our current funding without FAA private work.
Yeah. Jim.
Thank you.
Okay.
So,
I'm sorry.
So, Tony, by changing the western boundary of the airport, does that make that new area eligible for FAA funding?
I mean,
when it comes to the cost of road and cost of property acquisition, will that be possibly funded by FAA?
Potentially, yes.
Because of the boundary changes.
What?
Sorry, David, did you want to, do you have a comment?
Well, I would say that the simple answer is because the changes that are being proposed are driven by the need to meet FAA standards at an FAA eligible airport, then much of that work would be eligible for FAA funding. The boundary adjustment, essentially what would happen is that the western property line of the airport would be shifted to the west, essentially to the edge of the object-free area. Then on the opposite side of the highway, there'd be an offset of additional property acquisition needed in order to maintain that right-of-way. That western addition on the right-of-way would not be owned by ODOT. That would go basically into the ODOT highway. I think it's a trust or of something essentially. So it'd be a situation where there would be a small marginal expansion of the airport footprint, but then the reconfiguration of the right-of-way would not involve ODEV ownership. So that's, all of that, to our understanding and talking with FAA and under current funding guidance, would be eligible. It's a lot of money, so it's not an easy project, but it falls under the criteria for eligibility.
Thank you.
One last thing, I know you're short of time, got a busy agenda, but I was just going to acknowledge a couple things. And there's been a lot of comments made about the feasibility of the plan, or that there's never enough money, or the FAA will never fund it. And I wouldn't presume to speculate on that. We know that it's challenging. But the FAA in their current airport design advisory circulars have built in some pretty specific guidance that they've been consistent in providing throughout this. And essentially what it's saying is inconvenience or impracticability should not justify doing nothing. Doesn't represent justification to maintain in non-conforming situations. So that they've said that consistently throughout, and we've tried to maintain that. I know that there are a lot of other airports around the country where people will point fingers and say, well, they do it there, why can't we do it here? And I think the simple answer is that they're not wrong, but the FAA is changing and has changed its guidance to dealing with non-conforming items, and really prioritizing that. And Tony touched on the rehabilitation project or some of the other projects. The other thing the FAA, and this factors into the preferred alternative, the other thing the FAA has memorialized or codified in their advisory circular is they make a distinction between future construction or reconstruction projects versus rehabilitation projects. And what the current guidance says is that the FAA will not fund reconstruction or new construction at an airport that is in non-conformance. So that specifically could affect the runway extension, as an example. Rehabbing the current runway, as I think Steve mentioned, or another, that, yeah, those are the kinds of things that can continue to occur. But the bigger upgrades, if you will, are really tied to meeting standards. So it could be a
lighting.
Possibly lighting. It just kind of depends if it's considered an upgrade. I think possibly, but I'll hold back on judging too much on that.
Hey.
All right. Thank you so much for all of your input. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Anything else?
Thank you very much.
Keep moving on. Thanks so much.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. And we'll move on to our finance manager update. Chris.
Okay. So let me share my screen here. Okay, I just have a short presentation for you. I just want to give you an update on what the budget looks like right now. So I'm going to tell you what the governor's budget is looking like, and then an overview of where we are in the budget process. So we are right here. So the legislative session has started, and we did our presentation to the Ways and Means last week. So we went before the Subcommittee on Economic Development and Transportation. And that went well. And then the bills, the legislative concepts that we have put forward in the bills are making their way through the legislative process. And then when the session is complete at the end of June, those will all come together, and that will be our legislatively adopted budget. And then we can start executing on that in July. So these are the bills that are going to be part of our budget. So Senate Bill 5504 is our budget bill. So that's what we had our public hearing on last week. Senate Bill 5507 is the capital construction bill.
And so how that works is it's made up of all of the capital construction projects for the other state agencies as well. And so we have our Malino runway rehab project, or sorry, no, waterline and hangar project, and the Oak Ridge runway rehab project in there. Then we have House Bill 3479, and that is the commercial UAS insurance. And Senate Bill 792 is the one where we can put our fees into rule instead of statute. So those two are ones that you approved as legislative concepts last year. This is a summary of what we have for the governor's budget right now. So in light blue is the LAB from last biennium, just to compare. And then the dark blue is what we have right now for a budget. So we're looking at a little over 45 million, and I have it broken down into program here. So we have capital construction. For airport projects, we don't have any funds in there this biennium, so that's for general funds. So we're not receiving any general funds this biennium. And then we have aircraft registration, pavement maintenance, ASAP, which is the largest program, ops, and then general aviation entitlement. This is just a high level overview of the revenues that we put into the governor's budget. So 47% of those are from federal funds. And then the second largest revenue source is our fuel tax, which is 38%. And then we have 5% from the Connect Oregon grant that we got from Oak Ridge. And then the rest of the revenue is coming from aircraft registration fees and then various fees at the airports. These are the policy option packages that we put into the governor's budget. So POP 100 is the general aviation entitlement projects. So that one is almost $8 million, 90% federally funded. So right now we have 16 different projects planned at 10 different airports. POP 101 is the UAS insurance. So we've forecasted a little over $700,000 in revenue for that. Then we have POP 102 is the software for the aircraft registration airport leasing. And so I presented that to you at the previous board meeting. And then the last two packages are ones that we didn't have in the agency request budget because they came about in between budgets. So we were able to add them to the governor's budget. So that's the Oak Ridge project. We did receive the $1.7 million Connect Oregon funds for that one. And the matching funds are coming from COAR. And then the Malino Waterline project. And that one is going to be 95% federally funded. And that's all I have. I just whipped through that pretty quickly. And our governor's budget, we put it on the website. So if you get a chance, you can look at it there. It is very long, 300 pages. But if you wanted to get anything in more detail, we do have that on the website. So do you have any questions?
All right. Very good.
Thank you.
Okay. We're up to board updates. So this is a time provided for board members to share any news, events, related information. Anybody have anything you'd like to share? He's in sharing mood today. Okay.
Been through the new terminal twice. It's incredible.
Yeah,
It's incredible. A little bit of a long walk, but
It is. Yeah. I was only going to add, if there was nothing else, we did talk about showing the new.
Oh yeah, do that. And then I was gonna do staff direction to staff, but you could show the picture if you want to.
I do want to show. Okay. So this was mentioned briefly in my update this afternoon, and Google Earth, and I believe on just regular Google Maps, they've updated the satellite imagery, and it shows all the new markings and pavement maintenance from our recent surface seal project. So we're showing the new stencils, the on-ground text that we put to encourage vehicle and pedestrian access in the movement area. We changed our movement, the non-movement area boundary marking from a 6-inch wide marking to a 12-inch wide marking. So it's much more conspicuous. And this project added the enhanced center lines for each of the connecting taxiways. So along those lines, we it covered everything on the state taxiways, taxi lanes and aprons. Everything got refreshed. We included new island markings that we did not have previously. This was kind of a confusing area where the non-movement line went through this area, which is not usable for aircraft. And then similarly, all the way down along the continuous access point, again, new stencil, text, the wider movement marking, the non-movement area boundary marking, and then islanding an area that was marked as an island.
Cool.
Nice.
So it
Nice and crisp.
it is. It looks great.
Perhaps that is added significantly to the reduced number of DPDs or at least,
yeah, I believe so. This project it reached full completion in early October.
That new hangar is getting its crossbeam trusses put in this week.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. We will move to, if there's any other business that board or staff would like to bring up at this point. And then other than that, under agenda input, I don't know if this is the appropriate place, but do you need more clarified direction on what we're looking for the COAR rulemaking and or legislation recommendation around, I guess just defining the core priorities a little bit more clearly and specifically around priority 2. And then also other considerations like the cap, number of projects per airport.
Yeah, if you wanted and didn't mind to maybe send me like just summary email, just to make sure that all my notes are good.
Sure, I should do that.
and Chair, I'm going to, on the record, talk about board role and responsibility working in the future.
Good point. Steve, why don't you talk about that?
I just think that it'd be good for, from the board's perspective, to have a work session about the board's role and responsibilities in relation to a lot of input that comes to us for the board to resolve issues associated with staff or through the department or the position of the department. And I think it'd be really great for us to have both a work session with staff, with council to talk and then establish those guidelines and be able to refer those to individuals either when they come to us about a specific project or about during public testimony. So if we could work on that in the coming year, I think that would be helpful for us as board members and for the public as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I think ideally, a communication that's lives on our website, but then also maybe a briefer statement that we can utilize before every public comment period. So there's kind of restating our abilities and then what staff is really responsible for. Okay, very good. I think we've made it through our full agenda, and by golly, I think we're on time. So thanks, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month's meeting. Meeting adjourned.
Bye.